And we are live. How's it going, everyone? My name is Ahmed Mlih. Welcome to Civil Offense. We have a good show today because we have a new guest on, which we will get to in a minute. But first of all, we're going to be talking about a man who is beloved by ANCAP Twitter, Javier Milei. Okay, this guy, this Argentinian ancap savior. He's waking up the lions. He is he's a minarchist in the short term. He calls himself, but he says he's an ancap like philosophically. Okay. Throughout his campaign, he's proposed many policies that have been celebrated by liberals and ancaps alike as they would reduce the size of government, quote unquote. But what would many of these policies do? Are they being proposed now for a reason? And should libertarians increase their efforts in political action now that an anarcho-capitalist is taking office? I am joined by Filthy Heretic of Backalley Philosophy and Ignis as we discuss this here and now. So how's it going, Filthy? Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm doing all right. Do I sound okay?
Yep, to me you do.
Excellent.
Are we all balanced here? Does it sound good, guys?
Testing.
Okay, and we have Ignis. There we go. How's it going?
How's it going? It's going well. Nothing too much to say, so we can just jump right into it.
You got a fresh cut, I see.
Yes, changed it up. I no longer have to crane my neck so that my hair doesn't go in my eyes. It's about time.
All right. You got the bling on too. So let's see, just some quick announcements here. Go to ahmedmlih.com and sign up for my email list for the latest updates. Check out Civil Offense on Rumble. We are streaming there now. Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. I make sure to upload at the very latest by the next day. And if you want to join the Civil Offense Discord server, add me at anarcho-night train. That is anarcho night train with night and then rain as in but it is night train. That is the song name. Anyway, I'll get back to you on that. But now to the main show. So first, I'd like to ask you guys a simple question, honestly. What does Milei getting elected do for libertarianism? And I suppose we could go with Ignis first, actually.
What does Milei getting elected do for libertarianism? I'd say the general thing is it is incredible that staying true in messaging for the most part. He has, of course, advocated for minarchist policies, but more liberty-oriented policies, which we can get into the details about that later on. But he has advocated for these and stayed true to the platform that he has on. I don't think he's necessarily abridged any of his initial promises. And then also got endorsed by the other candidate in the race, what is, I guess, now considered the third-party candidate, to win this election where he got millions upon millions of votes, like an overwhelming victory in this case, and seeing this happen even in the like weird election scheme that they have, which I think is better fit for this sort of occurrence in the United States, so there's a bit of false positivity there, but seeing this happen is a good sign in the popularity and viability of these ideas. So it's not necessarily that his presidential position will be good for the libertarian movement worldwide, but seeing the election take place and then raising the profile of these ideas is incredible.
All right. What do you think, Filthy?
Well, let's see here. Another election, another lying sociopath with a fancy label trying to pass himself off as the savior of the people that he's actively oppressing. Why should I be impressed? Why should I expect really anything to change when the Argentinian regime is just going to continue to tax, to oppress, and to continue to do what the existence of states literally only exist to do, which is to acquire power, and because power exists entirely within a zero-sum economic ecosystem, can only be acquired by taking it away from something else. As such, their actions are, without fail, going to be parasitic. Whether he calls himself a libertarian, a socialist, a minarchist, a rainbowist, or insert whatever label you have here, doesn't really matter. He's either going to be ousted out right away, one way or the other, or he's going to do whatever is necessary to do what's in the interests of the Argentinian ruling class. And that's always going to be at the expense of the people as a general concept without fail. Now, I strongly suspect that this will emerge largely just as a result of them becoming a puppet regime of the United States, since, he did that thing where he replaced the peso or the Argentinian peso with the US dollar. The US dollar specifically thus intertwining their country with the United States' Federal Reserve. Very interesting choice, if I do say so, but it does basically guarantee that things aren't going to go well for them in the not too distant future, I would imagine.
So just to clarify, he is president-elect. He hasn't done this yet. This is a proposal he has put in to change the Argentinian peso to the dollar. Though I was going to talk about that later into this. I saw an article actually where, according to Bloomberg, Milei distanced himself from his dollarization guru, Emilio Campo, and on Friday, another hawkish advisor from early in the campaign, Carlos Rodriguez, announced on X that he was departing. Milei had repeatedly said he'd name Ocampo to lead Argentina's central bank, though he reiterated Friday that closing the institution was non-negotiable. So still, like, he has that plan to do it, but it is not something that has gone into effect or anything. He's not in office, and that is just the point there. I'm going to get to some chats real quick, and then Ignis, I'm going to let you to respond to that. So just keep your thoughts in mind on that. We got Into the Agora. What's up, man? Sweet haircut, Ignis. He likes your haircut. Okay. We see nothing. Mr. Krabs from Mr. Merchant. What do you get that SpongeBob reference?
Yes.
Is there what moment is he thinking of here?
So congratulations, sir. You just gave me my $1 millionth.
Oh, yeah.
Great. What do I win? Nothing. Now get out.
Yeah. Okay. So we got JC Armitage here. Says, sup Chumbas. Anyone want to guess how long Milei is going to last before he gets geeked, or how much nothing he'll accomplish assuming he lives through his term?
I guess this could just get into my reply, because one of the things that I was going to reply to is that he may either be ousted or be for the ruling class, but I'd say there's the third option, which is just like he's stalled. Like, he may, from all appearances, he knows all this Austrian theory. He knows it all. Not necessarily at all, but just gonna continue on.
Brave through it, man. Brave through it.
But there are just so many and I don't know the details of the Argentinian political system, but there's no doubts that they're like, I don't think he has a majority in the Senate or the Congress, so he won't be able to get all of the policies he wishes that he could through. So it could just be the case that whatever policies that he wishes to enact could just be stalled, not implemented, or in other ways just abridged. And then also I would say it's easy to be a cynic, but do not forget to be cynical of your own cynicism and where it's letting you off the hook from doing the work. And I think there are, especially in the case of like Argentina, if they were to kill him or anything else like that, that is the exhaustion of political means. And you would see a much greater call for, I would say, like true revolution and true, like, not necessarily libertarianism, but at least revolution, to where that would throw off much of the legitimacy which they care so much about in their process. And what I'd say about like legitimacy, if it didn't matter, then they wouldn't spend billions, if not trillions of dollars propagandizing people into caring about the legitimacy of elections and whatnot. That wouldn't be their sacred cow. So I think libertarians, especially of the agorist variety, are too quick to throw out, oh, if that you were just like a true upset to the system, then they would kill you. No, there's a certain bounds to which they wouldn't do that, because that would be too great of a cost to that action of killing you or berating you or anything else like that. Instead, they try to assassinate you in the media by calling you Trump-like or anything else like that as like the moderate. And if they were to try to go further for you, they would plant child porn on your account or anything else like that on your hard drives.
Okay. Thoughts on that, Filthy?
I mean, I should clarify, I don't know for sure if he's going to get assassinated or not. Now, let me clarify, let me rephrase that. I don't know if he's going to get Clintoned or not, but a lot of things can generally happen. All I know for certain is that he's either going to get ousted, whether that just means he gets booted from office, or he gets shot in the back of the head twice in a tragic weightlifting accident. I can't say. Or he's just going to he's going to end up with nothing. Nothing's actually going to change all that much, which honestly wouldn't surprise me even slightly. Or alternatively, it's just going to be more of the same, just that now he's going to be a bit more eccentric, and he'll have a couple of funny YouTube and Twitter moments. That's basically just means he's going to be Argentinian Trump, which is actually even more appropriate than you think, because I'm quite certain that his supporters when they see that really nothing has changed, or that some things may have even gotten worse from their perspective, what they're going to do is they're going to try either saying like, oh, he's not actually a libertarian, or alternatively, they're going to say that he's performing some kind of 69-dimensional chess maneuver to outwit the political class in some way that will never actually manifest, and because the claim is fundamentally unprovable.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add in here, I don't think it necessarily has to be when it comes to, will he get, or will the policies that he's promoting get passed or not, doesn't have to be a question of will they or won't they. I mean, the agorist, view here is that really the policies that the state needs to implement at the time are the ones that it will need to, or it will implement because of its needs, like as far as what it needs to put in at that certain time, just because it has that economically speaking. So really here, like, when it comes to, like, let's say the dollarization, maybe that doesn't happen, but something like, which I was actually going to bring up later in the show, he wants to privatize the airport or like airline services. Maybe that happens because it actually is a failing business and the state really can't be funding it for so much longer without it just collapsing.
I would disagree on this point that like the policies that the state enacts are the policies that the state needs to enact. And if you would like to respond to say like that's inaccurate, would you say that's an accurate summarization of what you just said?
Well, like, okay, yeah, I'm pretty much agreeing with the phrasing on what you're saying, but like, I guess to rephrase what I'm saying here is that the state sees a need for something economically speaking, or just for its ability to form politically, and therefore it will implement the policies and enforce those policies that actually are conducive to that.
And what I would say, just like there's just such a large range of possibilities that the state can such a large range of policies that the state can enact while it could still exist and while it could still thrive and benefit the ruling class and everything like that, to where I don't think you can draw such a correlative or causative line between this is a policy that the state has enacted, and so they must have enacted it so that the state can continue to exist. They don't need to enact many of these policies because, like, say policies that aren't enforced, it was enacted, the state needed to be enacted, and it's just like, oh, but the state needs the policy to not be enforced anymore or anything else like that. I think that's just reading too much into it, where you look at the specific, you could do like a detailed analysis of the actors at play. In a great many of them, it's just like, oh, this was in committee, and then the person at the top of the committee or anything like that, the ruling class told the person of the committee to, hey, let this through so this passes at the national level or anything else like that, or in the big leagues. But so many of these things where it's just like, yeah, do we want to do this? Yeah, sure, why not? We have a majority, so let's just do this, see what happens. We're mostly ideologically involved and invested in like in whatnot. And it's just like, what I'd like to say is just like, these institutions are generations old, to where you have many of the people who fill these seats buying into their own bullshit, where it's just like, I don't think fucking Nancy Pelosi is like, has a fucking idea of like Austrian theory and everything else like that. I bet she, if you were to like challenge her on this and if she was forced to be honest, I bet she would say like, oh yeah, the state needs to exist and everything else like that. Is she still an evil bitch? Yeah. Yeah, she is. She's still responsible for probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of deaths and everything else like that, and the expropriation of wealth of hundreds of millions of people. But I don't think it would be anything else like, oh, these people are perfect. Like these people know they're evil to the extent to which they actually are. They know they're evil, at least slightly, but they say like, oh, in our heart of hearts, we're really the good guys or anything else like that.
So that's not exactly what I'd say I'm proposing here. I'm saying, like, when they're in their roles like politicians, they're really just serving what that role is sort of just meant to be there for. Like, when the state is established, yes, the people that are doing it in the beginning understand the needs for like what each role has to serve and what each role has to do. So they create a layer of incentives in that position. So when you have a Nancy Pelosi going into office, she's not necessarily thinking about the incentives, but the incentives are placed over there, and she's acting in a manner that would be reflective of what those incentives are, because otherwise she's actually, going to be, like, somebody has leverage over her, and that person's probably going to do something about it if she like goes out of order of whatever that is. But I mean, like when I'm talking about like policies, I'm really talking about the enforcement more so than what actually gets passed, like, legislatively, what's written on paper. I think you're very focused on that, but I don't really think that's what the state acts on. They're not really going after like, okay, well, this law says this thing specifically, so this is what we must do now. It's more so like, okay, well, there is a need to, for example, like privatize the airport or airline services or whatever. And so, and it doesn't have to be anything specific either. Like it could be something broad like that. And it's just saying, okay, well, we can't pay for this anymore, so we need to privatize it. And, if it's something that requires like them saying, okay, well, here's our precedent for doing it, then they may pass a law to like show, okay, well, it is on the books, but they don't necessarily have to do that depending on what the enforcement is in what situation.
And what I'd say to that is the incentives that you're speaking of can only be enforced by other actors concurrently. The state, it's a little bit like tricky with the wording and everything else like that, but it's like the state doesn't exist. It's a psyop. They're just people with guns, lots of guns, way more guns than everyone else, so they're able to order people around. And so it's just like, if you have a new law that's passed that criminalizes XYZ something or another, the creation of widgets of this certain type of widget that's that people are creating. What matters is, say, like the district attorney of the area, whether or not he's going to press charges or everything else like that, and then the chief of police, and then the structure of the police down to like tell and beat cops to enforce this and everything else like that, and then say like federal agents and investigating people for creating widgets of a certain variety. Say like receivers of firearms or something like that. But it's just like the incentives are there, and they only exist insofar as they're like rules written on paper, and then people enforcing those rules written on paper with the force of the government. So it's a similar thing.
Yep. Sorry if I'm interrupting your train of thought, but I did want to respond to the comment about the nature of the state as something that doesn't exist. While I would agree in the sense that the state is an abstraction, the fact that you're describing it as simply people with guns, in other words, a militia firm, is very revelatory of why it is that you think that the state at all operates purely on ideology or just simply bad people doing bad things, when the state as an organizational model and trying to examine the state from that perspective gives us a very clear idea as to what those incentives are that was being described earlier, where the state necessarily has to, or necessarily intertwines its own interests with the interests of the people who operate within it. And it's not just like exclusive to the state. Literally anyone using any technique at any given point in time has incentives placed upon them based on the techniques they're using. A man with a hammer, for example, you've heard the old saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's the same thing with doctors. It's the same thing with woodworkers. It's the same thing with politicians. They have their skills, they have their expertise, they have the positions that they're in, and those positions, even though they are purely abstractions, because doctors, for the same reason the state does not exist, it's an abstraction based on a series of skills and expertise, as well as expectations placed upon them based on the reputation that they have as this role as a doctor. Applying this to political rule, however, remember what I described at the beginning of this conversation, where the state necessarily, or the state as a firm, only exists for the purposes of acquiring and maintaining power. Contrast that with, say, a business whose interest is in acquiring and maintaining wealth. The difference between wealth and power is that you can just create wealth. You can add value. You can't do that with power. Power is always zero sum, and the only way it can get and maintain power is by taking it away from others. As such, as I just to kind of repeat what I said earlier, the only way it's going to ever be able to act in relation to people who are outside of their organizational model is going to be parasitically. This manifests in an incentive for people like Nancy Pelosi to described to behave parasitically. She's not doing what she does because she's just cackling maniacally while brewing adrenochrome in a cauldron in her basement.
But she's
doing that because that's the incentive that she
Allegedly
has based on the role that she has acquired. Now, one could say that there is a certain type of sociopathy that is required in order to be able to excel in that role. And I think there's a very strong case to be made. But all I'm describing here is that you take a prison warden and you take literally anyone else, train them in being a prison warden, and then put them in that position, they're going to do more or less the same thing that the previous prison warden did, even if they were nothing but like incredibly critical of the way the prison warden was treating inmates, the way that they were doing this, doing that. This guy, this new guy in Argentina, whose name I cannot be bothered to remember because he really is just that unimportant, is going to do basically the same thing. And the only reason that I say that he can be ousted one way or the other is just simply because that is a possibility. Because, people who aren't total sociopaths do exist. There could come a point where he just recognizes what he is, what he has become, or what he has to become, and it just like goes, all right, I'm out. That can happen. I'm not saying that can't. However, whether or not that's going to happen, I can't possibly predict for, but there's just the simple observation that the state is not some interest neutral thing that is just simply a series of levers waiting to be moved around by the right people or the wrong people. And problems that exist in societies parasitized by governments today exist solely because the wrong people happen to be moving the levers of power at that given moment. It's an organizational model. It's a technique in the way that Jacques Ellul describes in a technological society. These things apply incentives to their users. And we can demonstrate very clearly what those users are, or what those incentives are, and how they influence behavior. That's why people or politicians do what they do, while they will continue to do so for as long as political rule and politics as a technique is able to be useful.
And you said a lot there, so I'm going to step back a bit. But I would say that the state has more functions than just a militia or a security firm, defense firm, or aggressive defense firm. Insofar it embeds itself in as much as possible because, like you're saying, it has this incentive for power. And the more that it embeds itself, the more that, one, bureaucrats are able to enrich themselves, but two, the parasites at the top are able to enrich themselves. And what I'd say additionally is you're talking about Nancy Pelosi acts parasitically due to incentives at play rather than just being maniacally evil. But I would say is just she is acting out of self-interest. She passes many of the policies she does in order to play the market and enrich herself, in addition to paying off crony buddies who keep her elected, everything else like that. Every lobbyist at play is lobbying for a reason, because they want access to this political power to benefit themselves within the market. This would be a bit different with a socialist market, or like a complete, not socialist, but centrally planned market, I'll say, without any firms competing for each other, where you would just have the consolidation into one firm within a sector, and you would just get a whole different power politic at play that would probably be more gruesome, at least for the people at the bottom. But then additionally, I remember you pointing out about the state getting other people invested, and I'd add upon this by, I think it was Alexander Hamilton. I don't necessarily want to besmirch his name, but I think he was the one that supported a national debt because that it would get rich people invested, because the debt would be towards the rich people, such as probably the bankers and whatnot, and then they would be invested in the health of the government. So then they would act in accordance with that desire for investment and seeing that wealth flourish and everything else like that. So I'd say yes, but all of this is individuals acting in their own self-interest and then getting others in line to act in accordance with the individual at the top's interest, and then trying to get the peons below them to act in their self-interest and align that with that of those at the top. So I don't think it's necessarily about the state. It's about just the interactions between individuals.
Well, of course, people are going to be operating in their own self-interest. This is observed in praxeology. I think that was such a given that I didn't even feel the need to point it out. Everybody at all points are always going to be operating in their interests, and those interests are always going to be manipulated by people's perceptions, whether that's simply a hallucinogen because, I don't know, they took too much shrooms, or just simply because they're a politician and they've intertwined their interests with the health of the state, and as such, that's where their incentives lie. But the case of, and of course, as I said before, the interesting thing about perception and how the state manipulates that through propaganda, which is an interesting conversation in and of itself, is that by using tools of propaganda, by creating these grand, elaborate plays in theaters called elections, they can get people to perceive that their interests lie with the state, no matter how destructive or parasitic it actually is. Give people to believe that they have some means in being able to alleviate their own oppression. In the 1950s, Johns Hopkins University actually did a study on mice and put them in these graduated cylinders full of water. And what happened is, like, if they left them there for 15 minutes, the rats would drown. However, if they took the rats out at the 14-minute mark, let them just like sit outside of the cylinder, like on land for like a minute or so before putting them back in, they will continue to tread water for 60 hours because they perceive that, this is bad, I'm dying, but maybe there's some hope. Maybe I might be rescued again. And this kind of psychological trick is exactly what the state does in regards to whatever quote unquote wins people can perceive from it. Oh, maybe this policy that I happen to like or perceive to be in my interests will be passed, or this candidate I happen to support will be useful. Therefore, the state can't actually be that bad. Yes, it is. They're trying to manipulate you. They're giving you a release valve for the pressure and frustration that's been building up over the years as a direct result of their actions. They do this all the time. Like even the Soviet Union, they had opposition publications designed specifically to give people who were otherwise dissenting from the official Soviet narrative, because if they didn't do that, they would otherwise do things that were actually effective in undermining political rules, such as counter-economizing, acting in ways subversive to the state's interests, undermining their ability to continue to enforce political or legislative fiat. They might actually do things like, I don't know, trade around central banks. Can't have that now, can we?
But what I'd like to say, unless you want to do questions, Ahmed, were you about to speak?
I could do some chats, but yeah, you can go ahead on what you were going to say, and then I'll do that.
What I'd like to say is, I think just the general idea that you're getting at is that political means are exhausted, and that's the sense that I would say, but you're saying like political means are inefficacious towards achieving liberty, and liberty itself, yes, in achieving a better condition for the people living under the political system, I'd say it's possible to use political means towards that end. More likely the local elections in which you can be more efficacious rather than anything on the national level where you have to overcome these gigantic guards that they have in place. But what I would say is, why not support the exhaustion of political means as much as possible so that you can then persuade everybody, including those who don't know theory, especially those who don't know your agorist class theory, into seeing, hey, this whole game is rigged because look, I can point to this instance of, hey, this dude wanted to pass like 0% income tax and they fucking killed him, rather than just like, oh, our agorist class theory shows that the organizational model of the state won't allow such an individual to take office and be efficacious in the position, yada, yada, yada. So would you support the exhaustion of political means as much as possible, or no?
Do you think I give a crap how many people in the world know agorist class theory? That doesn't matter to me even slightly. Literally, I can be the only person in the planet who understands agorism even as a concept, let alone as a theory, and I can still achieve my ends very, very easily. The thing I want to tell people is not, hey, agorist class theory, it's this understanding of the state and its actual relationship with you. The thing I want to tell them is, hey, I have potatoes. Do you want to buy them? They're duty-free.
So then how does this act against the state? I mean, like, I understand, like, the counter economics of just, like, using black and gray markets and everything else like that, but it sounds like you don't care about bringing about a stateless society or anything else of the sort.
I don't care about bringing a stateless society through politics because I know that politics is
not just through
actively
politics in
detrimental.
general.
Okay.
Let me finish. I understand that political means of any sort, like, I don't need to exhaust all political means because I already know with absolute certainty that political means will never, under any circumstances and for all time, will never achieve a state lowercase s of freedom, because freedom exists, or freedom is a state, again lowercase s, in society that can only emerge absent political means being able to be utilized. And the use of political means of any sort necessarily implies that politics is still available to be used as a means, which means that, well, freedom hasn't been achieved. So you can try whittling down the state to such a granular level as you wish, but you're still using political means, trying to figure out the best way to utilize an economy of power to subjugate, to control, and oppress people, just in ways that are slightly different than the prevailing legal theory that you're otherwise competing against. So yeah, the thing is, like, if you want to actually achieve anti-political ends, which I assume is what you want, then your ends have to be consistent with your means. And if your means are not anti-political, then I can promise you your ends will not be anti-political either. Otherwise, it would be just as valid for me to get out of a shower and dry myself off by jumping into the bathtub full of water.
Okay, so we have some chats that actually, two of them are from Into the Agora. Ancat is kind of trying to clear things up, and also we have one from Grambo. So I'm going to read those first before I go to the other chats, and then we'll discuss these before we actually do that. So we have Into the Agora. Technological innovation, he's basically saying it's greater than most normie counter-economic trades. But what he's explaining here is I don't think he's saying that he doesn't care, and he's talking about filthy, about bringing about anarchy. I think he just doesn't see convincing people ideologically as necessary for it. And then we have Grambo saying political means don't often get the results you want, and having a prescribed way of how society should operate through the state results in failure.
That is correct. I'm not saying that I am not saying that I don't want anybody to understand agorism. I'm just stating that it is not necessary. I don't need to convince anyone to do anything that otherwise what is in their interests. And all I seek to do is to demonstrate through people, through my actions, the best way for them to be able to achieve the best means of their life. Technological innovation, peer-to-peer networking, mutual aid societies, and any other sort of means by which people can achieve their ends are all practical, applicable things that people do in their own life. And I think people in the audience, including yourself, even doing them right now. I mean, I think we're all adults here. How many of us have not downloaded something from off the internet that probably wasn't acquired through the most legal means?
I mean, I would say that you should never break the law in any circumstance whatsoever, especially the law. I don't know where I was going to go with that. You should never break any law for any reason whatsoever. Always listen to your glowy fed op on Instagram.
Don't break the law. That's against the law.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sorry if I'm interrupting here, but let's create a purely hypothetical scenario that I promise you has never occurred ever. Let's say that there was a song you wanted. However, you didn't have the money to buy that song. So hypothetically, you downloaded that song onto your device because you like that song and want to be able to listen to it on your device. Now, I'm not saying you did this. This is, again, purely hypothetical. But hypothetically, that's something that someone would reasonably do, right?
Hypothetically.
Yeah. So with this in mind, do you see how in this hypothetical scenario, of course, once it's become obvious to the bulk of the population how easily they can acquire music or TV shows or video games or any other piece of content that's otherwise protected or quote unquote protected through IP or copyright or any of that nonsense, it's demonstrable how much better, how much more easily acquired, and how cheaper it is to do that they just do that habitually. I think that's a reasonable case to make in this hypothetical scenario. You would agree?
Yeah.
Well, do not go to hdwatch.tv or the flixer.tv.
Do not do these things.
A hypothetical version of myself in another universe definitely doesn't have it open.
Do not do this, otherwise Ignis will
call the glowy fed up on you.
I think you said you wanted to set their house on fire.
What? Me? No. I just want just the Firebirds brighten my heart for the state, baby.
I must have misheard you then. Sorry. Anyways, yeah. So that's just a good example of that. But taking that example of how, hypothetically, of course, that particular piece of legislative fiat is completely undermined just by people acting in their interests. Like, I'm pretty sure you're familiar how in the 2000s, there was actually, at least in the United States, a big propaganda push to try to dissuade people from illegally downloading music.
You wouldn't download a car.
Participate in that at all, but like I personally remember seeing all these posters about like this college freshman got hit with a $2 million fine because she downloaded music. So don't do that. Finger wag, finger wag, finger wag.
And yeah, I mean, South Park did an episode on it.
Yeah, and now it's like, I remember seeing a statistic like 2 or 3 years ago about how over 50% of all sports content is watched or consumed through illegal streaming sites. 50%.
No, who does that?
Now, it's
breaking
a waste,
the law is so
it's
unpopular.
A waste to do it on sports. It's a waste to do it on sports, but you know, at least you're trying.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm no sports ball fan, even slightly, but I think we can all appreciate the extent to which counter-economic means being overwhelmingly superior to white market means has actively influenced and incentivized people's behavior, all the while literally none of them have to be counter-economists. None of them have to be philosophical or ideological agorists. In fact, the matter is, I would wager that the overwhelming majority of them identify as Republican or Democrats. I mean, it's a very, very safe bet to make in all fairness, but yeah, that's all I'm referring to. Like, if we can apply that same exact concept to other fields in which the white market is otherwise incredibly dominant, then like what happens in any other election, what the state could possibly do, really is completely unimportant at that point, because all of that economic activity that isn't being taxed means that the state is not going to be able to have any sort of resources with which to use as collateral to borrow debt, and all they're left with is money printing, which even then that won't work because the value of that given centralized currency will just continuously plummet, incentivizing people even further to counter-economize in alternative forms of exchange, whether that's barter or some other currency impossible to plan for, impossible to guess. But you can apply this to like literally everything. And it's really just at that point, not a matter of if we can get the state to collapse, but when. But no, it's like you go on Twitter. Like, admittedly, I don't go on Twitter. I just hear about this through secondhand means. Going on about this guy in Argentina, I'm just like, why? All that time and effort, if anything, I see it as kind of a waste. All that time, effort, and even resources that went into getting this guy elected. Do you have any idea how many farms could have been set up with that capital? How many workshops? How many 3D printers? Like, nowadays, we have 3D printers that can build themselves. And I don't just mean like 3D printers that build other 3D printers. I mean a 3D printer that prints its own components as it's running.
Or like components of the next copy.
Oh yeah, that too.
Yeah.
But I'm saying like literally a self. I mean, I don't mean like a self-replicating 3D printer. I mean a self-growing 3D printer.
I've seen
Yeah.
the self-replicating one. I don't know about the self-growing one.
Oh, I probably have to show you that because like that was being shared around in the Backalley a couple days ago. Fairly new, so not surprising.
And I think
if
it's
people haven't heard of it, but yeah, that's a thing, and I think it's a pretty cool indication of just where things are going and just how screwed the state actually is.
Oh,
I
are you
saw-
talking
or
about
I
the one that
posted-
like prints like its own arms up?
Yes.
Or are you just okay? I get what you mean. Yeah.
Oh,
I've
you
been
have
posting
seen
some
that.
in my server where like it shows like some guy like printing like metal components as well. Like he's working on like the 3D printer that prints a 3D printer, and like he's showing like how he's actually making the parts of it work, or like how he's actually making it make the parts, which is pretty
Doing-
interesting.
Yeah, doing the motors and stuff, that's probably going to be the hardest part, and the
Yeah.
integrated circuit.
And I've also heard. I mean, I haven't really looked into it, but I saw a thing about a guy making a homemade metal 3D printer that apparently costs $100 in components. Which I don't know if you're aware, but it's like metal 3D printing is getting it that cheap is a quantum leap because metal 3D printers can normally go for around like 50,000. Not exactly desktop available, unless you just have that money lying around, I guess.
Yeah, I think I saw the same video as you because I shared it in my server.
Yeah, but it is like you have major quantum leaps. You have, of course, AI developed content being shared around, and people working on that. I love those Pixar fake movie posters, but that's just me. But I do enjoy the whole. People are of course using it to make entertaining things. They're also using it for all sorts of other stuff. Like I'm seeing videos of like describing historical events and historical figures using obviously AI generated images to like really sell the point.
Well, I've seen meme ones where it looks really dumb. Like they're just it's like brain rot content where they have like these like meme characters just like that they're supposed to look like people, but they're like moving around like this is my story of like how I jumped out of an airplane. I'm like some guy that's 500 pounds and I like exploded on impact. Yeah, like that kind of
where
stuff.
it's like only the face moving around. It's like morphing a little bit.
Yeah. Exactly that. No, but to make this more like a Socratic seminar, I wanted to piggyback off of what Filthy was saying earlier. Pretty much like how he was talking about with like political means being a distraction. I think like that's an important point to make. And I was telling him this before the episode that I actually do because I've talked about it a little in another episode I was doing. I forgot which one it was, or maybe it was when I was talking with Esso. I don't know. But basically the idea here being that people are already having so much of their time and energy being taken away from them in efforts that are essentially what has been propped up as what is beneficial for the state as far as like the white market, like what activities are going to be beneficial for the society that the state wants to see. So like you already have people working in these like structural like 9-to-5 jobs where they don't really have any freedom as far as what they want to do or what they could really be doing. You don't really have a true free market in more ways than just you're not paying taxes and maybe you're not able to open this business here in this one instance. Like there's a lot of things that would be different if the state were not intervening. But what that is to say is that essentially people have been sort of boxed in by that, and with the few time and resources they have left, they've essentially been told, okay, well, how about you use the rest of that to be making a real change in your life? How about you do you go volunteer for this candidate? How about you go spend your time learning about elections and watch the news, actually watch debates, watching this and watching that, and going out and petitioning, like doing all these things. And so basically it's almost like a time waster on top of the time waster that people are already going through. And I think it's more so just to keep funneling people through that like meat grinder of just destroying like their ambitions and their ability to really do anything that they wish to do.
You're a really smart feller. You should get a political science degree.
Yeah, that too.
But a lot was said by Filthy, so I'm just gonna go back a bit. But earlier I wasn't saying that in terms of like convincing other people of your propositions, it isn't. I'm not just talking about political means to achieve statelessness. I'm saying political means can get you to a more preferable state, small s, and then at the same time too. To have a stateless society, you need other people who want it and will maintain it and will prevent any state from reforming. I think we have a difference in class theory where you have agorist class theory, and I have probably closer to Hoppian class theory in terms of you have the productive class made up of producers, traders, and homesteaders. And you have the anti-productive class made up of people who petition for and enact the expropriation of property from producers, traders, and homesteaders. And the anti-productive class needs to be opposed at every measure and in every instance. So supporters of communism, Marxism, socialism, Marxist-Leninism, yada, 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 democracy supporters, monarchy supporters, and whatnot must be excluded from a stateless society or disassociated from a stateless society. And any aggressive means, of course, has to be stopped at all measure. Additionally, I wouldn't call stateless society anti-political by necessity. I'd ask for a proof that it is, or I would say that it is an equivocation between the two to interchange the terms. I am for a stateless society that doesn't necessarily involve an anti-political end. And then I think you overstate what can be black marketized in terms of the ability of the forensic evidence of physical things existing allows the state to say, how'd you get that car? With what income did you get that car? How are you making your money? How are you able to live, afford things? That sort of thing, where they can, before the state would cease to exist, it would rather audit every single American citizen, I would imagine, if it ever got to that point. So I don't think, like, if you actually evaded taxes and then you supposedly just are destitute and whatnot, and then the IRS takes a peek-see and you got a little homestead going with some creature comforts of the modern era, I think they would look at you and say, you know, I think you're kind of evading taxes there. And then they would slap their cock on your face and tell you to pucker up. And then the last point is, I think it's important to distinguish between what are red markets and what are black and gray markets. That is to say, what is truly criminal, and I would say that is aggression. And I would say aggression is the initiation of conflict. Conflict is the contradictory use of scarce resources as a means, and one ought not aggress is true via the nature of scarcity of resources. Homesteading principle and everything else like that. We can get into that discussion, but I think we more or less agree, except maybe not on the fine details of that.
No, actually, we're not very close at all, because you're still trying to use political means. You still think it's a viable solution to trying to achieve a state of freedom. I mean, to be fair, I'm not even entirely clear if what it is that the ends that you're trying to seek actually are a state lowercase s of freedom.
Stateless society, so no anti-productive class in society. And then I was saying we were close in regards to ethics in terms of non-aggression.
Well, that begs the question. What do you mean by non-aggression?
Explainative. Aggression is the initiation of conflict. Conflict is the contradictory use of scarce resources as a means. So if I want to use your body as a means to store my knife in it, that would be aggression, because you are the owner of your body, and I am initiating conflict with you by trying to use it as a means alternative to your own and contradictory to your own.
This can also result in instances of cooperation, where people can have a rivalrous claim to a given scarce resource, but then work out a resolution on their own as to how this resource is allocated. Conflict is still initiated by that definition. However, nothing actually happened that I think would characterize injustice as having emerged, when the study of ethics as a science is a question of how justice emerges and how injustice emerges within interpersonal relationships, whether they be brief or long term. So I don't see that as being a valid scientific understanding of an ethical proof.
I wouldn't say your example of cooperation is in any way contradictory or negatory towards the the non-aggressive principle, because that's just the owner consenting to the use of the property as a means. Even
No,
if like
I didn't say anything about who owned anything.
No, you're saying like a rivalrous claim, assuming one of them is the owner of it, that the owner is within the set in question, then one of them is allowing the other to use the property as a means to the extent to which they come to a cooperative agreement about it.
Not necessarily. I didn't say anything about who the owner would be.
You're talking about rivalrous claims to property, and I said assuming that one of them was. If neither of them are, then they're both aggressing on the property, and again, that doesn't negate the non-aggression principle.
That doesn't follow either, because there are plenty of situations where people can have rivalrous claims without either of them being the owner. In the case of public property, not public property in the sense that the state owns something, but in the sense that it's like communally owned.
Collective property norms are false. They contradict themselves.
How is it false?
The owner is the one that ought to win a given conflict. I can get to more precise definition, but that's the one that I have on the top of my head. To say that two people ought to win a given conflict can get you to the ridiculous situation where those two people get into a conflict with each other, and you're saying that they both ought to win, but given the nature of scarcity, where only one person can win the conflict, you end up with a contradiction between the nature of scarcity and the assumption that two people can win a conflict. That is to say that a stick can be at point A and point B with a distance between point A and B greater than 0, which is to say stick can be in two places at once. It's not true.
Right.
But there are plenty of instances where a particular scarce resource can certainly be used by two people simultaneously. A street, for instance, can be used communally, as can the stick example, where an individual might be able to have their means achieved by one person utilizing it in exactly the same manner as they would. That doesn't at all imply that any given exclusive claim is valid or isn't. Plus, this also presupposes that it is valid for property norms to be imposed onto others, which can only be done through, once again, political means. How social norms emerge is an entirely a question of a relationship between two individuals and how it is that they want their claims to given resources to interact with one another, which is something that nobody can possibly predict for, least of all myself. And we, as libertarians, should recognize that there are going to be property norms that are going to emerge between different people, in different environments, in different societies, and with different contexts that are going to be unknown to us at this time, which could include property norms that either of us simply aren't familiar with, because, imagination is infinite. So as such, there are theoretically infinite number of ways property may be allocated. It's entirely possible that you could have an entirely communal society, some sort of property society, maybe a mix of both, where people own the land that they actively make use of, but the streets that connect them is communally owned, that sort of thing. I'm not trying to advocate for one thing or the other, but I'm simply advocating for what I would describe as a rational humility in regards to how property is going to emerge in the absence of political organization. Because if we're just saying that, no, you can't use property this way, then the only way that can really be achieved is through, I think you can finish that sentence.
Well, so I think Filthy's criticism here is coming when you like are discussing enforcement agencies, like, and how they would resolve this dispute, rather than saying like what the actual truth to the matter is when two people like are saying we both have a claim to this, and then trying to resolve that with some sort of like arbiter that they both agree to, which could just be their like neighbor or something.
To go to that specifically, in terms of like no, you can't use property this way, or dictating how people use the property, it is just to say that there is one true owner of property, not that the owner of this property, must not share the resource or anything else like that. Because of course, property can be used for non-contradictory means. That's why I didn't just specify all means. You are using my shirt to be looked at. You are looking at my shirt, so you're using it as a means non-contradictory to my own. If you were to try to wear my shirt at the same time as me, we would either have to get really close, or you'd have to take my shirt from me. In which case, you would have to take my shirt from me because I don't know you like that, bro. But the validity of property claims originates with homesteading and then is transferred with voluntary trade. Homesteading is the first use of a given scarce resource as a means. So the first person to pick up the stick is not initiating conflict with anyone else. The next person to try to use it as a means while the person still has ownership over the stick is initiating conflict with them. It doesn't relate to the nap itself. The nap just defines what aggression is. And then there can be different property norms that have emerged. That doesn't mean they're not false via self-contradiction. There can be different religions that form. There can be different false ideas that form. People could think that 2 + 2 = 5 in the sense that isn't just related to the abstractions, but in the actual sense of the concept of 2 plus the concept of plus the concept of plus the concept of 2 plus the concept of equals the concept of 5. That would be false, just via the definition or like the meanings of what those truly are. And that's all the points that I have written out.
Filthy, I could let you respond to that, but I do have to take care of chats after. It's been a while since I've read them.
Yeah, so that's really a misunderstanding of social science to say that there is an incorrect way for social norms, which includes property norms, to emerge within a society. Either they can or they can't.
I'm not saying it's descriptive. I'm not saying this is how social norms emerge. It's not about social science. It is just about what is true via the existence of scarcity and other premises, but primarily scarcity. In that, like, to say that to have a norm that implies contradiction is false via the law of non-contradiction. So to have a set of norms that are false, you can have the non-false set of norms, or at least the norms that don't self-contradict themselves. And the natural law of non-aggression encapsulates the only norm that doesn't self-contradict.
Well, that actually begs the question: how do you even know that natural law as a concept is valid?
I'm just referring to the natural law of non-aggression as a natural law. I don't necessarily mean like it's divinely inspired or anything else like that. I'm just saying that it is due to the nature of reality that the non-aggression principle is true.
How do you know that, though?
Via the proof for it.
Which is?
Let me see if I have it up, which I don't.
Okay.
So let's get to super chats, and I can see if I can grab it.
Yeah. Not super. You need to donate for that.
Oh yeah, not super.
Yeah, unfortunately, why don't you guys donate to me, huh? Let's see.
He needs it. He's poor. He's poor.
Look at that. You see that StreamYard logo that Ignis can point to and I can't? You know, like my plan is no longer there. My premium plan is gone. I need your money. Okay, so we got Patrick Quinn saying, Ahmed, you look like Santa. I do. I don't know if that's the beard as well as the hat or what. Let's see. We got Mr. Merchant. The Javier Milei situation feels like the conch shell episode from SpongeBob. Okay.
I'm trying to figure that one out. I don't get it.
you like pull the conch and people are saying, oh, he's saying exactly what we're supposed to do right now. I don't know. Let's see. So we got into the Agora saying, I think the state has way more insidious ways of silencing people. And that was in response to saying that, they could assassinate people. But Ignis also did say, yeah, I mean, they can use media. They have other ways. But let's see. Mr. Merchant, he is a step in the right direction in showing why political means will ultimately fail and pragmatisming. What
I think he's trying to say pragmatizing.
Pragmag.
I read it right the first time. I will not change the fact that it won't achieve our libertarian ends. Okay, so let's see. Rambo Woo and finally another live stream with Filthy Heretic. Let's see. We got JC saying, to put what Heretic Chan said about the state's organization model in a high fantasy analogy, the state is like the One Ring from the Lord of the Rings, not the Triforce from Zelda. Okay, so we got into the Agora saying, Mises bros, rise up. Yep, hell yeah. Let's see. Yeah, Patrick wanted me to notice him. JK, I'm just messing. All right. We got Grambo. It's because those means I get to listen to one of my favorite sets from the DJ, club, and rave scene that are twice as better today, let alone my favorite EP tracks too. Okay, nice.
I don't remember what EP is.
Extended play, like a shorter form of a long, or what is it? LP. I forgot what that is.
I know he's referring to music. It's like electronic punk or something. I actually don't remember.
What? Oh, is that what is he referring to the genre? I thought he meant like EP, like off of a project, like, like a 3 to 7 track playlist of songs. Let's see.
Continue.
Yeah, we got JC Armitage saying, wasn't Lars Ulrich, let's see, Metallica's drummer, one of the major figureheads of the anti-song piracy jihad of the 2000s? Probably.
I don't remember, sorry.
Patrick says, Cone Dragon gets mad that individuals applied their capital that best fits their values.
All right, first off, this is a traffic cone.
Oh, it's still
and
a
this
cone.
is the best traffic cone because I am the king of the roads. And of course, every king needs a crown. Secondly, I'm a lizard, not a dragon. I wish I was a dragon, though. That would be nice.
You can update it.
Just make yourself a dragon.
I can't change who I am. I'm not a tranny.
Except you see, the dragon isn't just a lizard. The dragon is the embodiment of all predation. It's a cat. It's a bird. It's a snake. It's all of the things in one. So to say that a dragon doesn't exist is just wrong, bucko. There are dragons everywhere.
But as he said, he's not a tranny. Let's see. So, but do you have any response to the comment here? I don't remember exactly what it was about.
I mean, people are going to take their goods, their resources, and apply it to ways that benefit their values. I mean, that's kind of a given.
I don't remember the exact statement that was in response to.
Yeah, my guess is that it was something that Ignis was talking about in regards to people with exclusive and enforceable claims to their own property, and us disputing whether or not in the scenario we were discussing that exclusive ownership was successfully established. I'm just guessing here because I don't know when that was posted.
It was posted like 20 minutes ago.
When that was happening. But in response to the comment, there's really nothing for me to get mad about. I mean, people are going to use their resources to the best of their knowledge or best of their things to achieve their interests.
No, he's saying basically like you're upset that people put money into political efforts. He was mad people spent money on Milei instead of farms.
Well, actually, I'm not really angry or mad. I would just say I'm disappointed because if they genuinely, it's I know it's a question of perception. I know that there's no such thing as objective value, but it just strikes me that there is genuinely a lot of misinformation out there related to the best way to achieve libertarian ends. This is, of course, done through a lot of misinformation, propaganda, and bad actors. I would consider Hans Hermann Hoppe to be chief among the bad actors in the libertarian movement. But that being said, it's like, unfortunately, there were a lot of libertarians who did genuinely believe that Milei was the best way of being able to achieve their ends at that particular moment. And I just can't help but think of the lost potential in community workshops, 3D printers, technological projects that could have been done and farms, of course, that otherwise wouldn't, because they put money into the campaign of another politician. It's just like, do you really want to do you really want to be a shill for a politician? Just think about that very carefully, I think.
Okay, so we got Sapphilus. What's up, man? The motors were electrostatic. It isn't capable of doing integrated circuits, though. Just allows you to print plastic and electro-paste portions at the same time, so basic PCBs are possible.
Yeah, I think this is referring to the printer that grows itself. You can't print circuits, unfortunately, yet, right. But you can still, as described, grow the arms.
Okay. We got Humvee 94. What's up, man? Right now, the owner of my body is the demon that is coming out of me as I piss out of my ass. Okay.
That is impressive, and I'd very much like to take him, put him in a lab, isolate him, and figure out if there's a way to replicate this behavior.
Yeah, you go to Taco Bell.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind then.
Let's see. So Grambo says property demarcated by fiat or by action is the question should be asked also.
Action.
Right. So because poor.
I would need to know what that's a response to.
Let's see. Oh, shit. He said Taco Bell is the right answer. Why are you going? Why? Let's see. So we got a few
people
more
are just
here.
like, I don't know if I should have more red meat in my diet. That might make me have like bathroom issues. Then go to Taco Bell and blow out your fucking toilet and think that was pretty yummy. I think I'll do it again.
Yeah, they eat everything that's not the red meat. Like they eat all the bullshit, and then they're like, yeah, that had to be the red meat, man. That beef is what definitely did it to me.
I ate a big juicy steak like 3 hours ago.
Nice.
That's good. That's really good. Let's see. Mr. Merchant says pragma gasizming.
Gasming. Oh, okay.
It's
not like neo-pragmatists, and then it's like combining with like a Coomers.
Gasming.
Yeah.
Gasming. No, that says gasisming. Gasisming. That's why I read it as gasizming.
Gasisming. Oh yeah, you're
right. I think it's trying to say pragmagasming.
Because it would, I mean, if anything,
I think it's like trying to mix like pragmatism with orgasming, but
yeah.
Pragmagizing.
You should have just removed the Z in the I, and it would read as gasming.
Yeah,
gasming. Yeah, that would have been right. Yeah, Grambo said extended play. I was right. Let's see.
Oh, you were right.
And then he wrote it again. Pragma gazing. That's you still got it wrong. You still got it wrong. Pragma gasming. There you go.
He's not gonna stop.
We're workshopping at people.
Oh, we got one last one from JC. What the fuck is up with their paranoia of red meat anyways?
I'm
propaganda.
Sure,
okay.
You go
let's get into a red meat.
Wait, hold on. Before you say that, we got one from Humvee again. An update. I'm a little whore when it comes to the crunch wrap. Okay, we'll stop chats. Ignis, go ahead on the red meat.
And I'll come back to like the proof, which I couldn't find, so I'll just have to come up with it on top of my head. But with red meat, there was much of the anti-red meat lobby, basically in the United States, was the Seventh-day Adventists, which is a like sect of Christianity. They're vegetarians. They're very bought into it, and they participate in a lot of studies on diet. They don't declare their bias. They don't declare that they have a religious, like, fanatic obsession with getting people to stop eating meat. And they're just like, oh yeah, but everyone else needs to declare that they took like $50 from whatever beef lobby and everything like that. And it's just like, of course, as a scientist, you should declare every single bias that you have, not just the $50 or religious experience. But one of the main people to and I'm pretty sure he was with Seventh-day Adventist, like 95% certain. John Harvey Kellogg of Kellogg's cereal and everything like that, where he believed that red meat and other things like that caused your libido to be greater.
That's
made
true, though.
You more horny. And he was right. He was right on the science, everything else like that, where He wanted people to stop masturbating. He wanted people to stop doing playing in the devil's playground and everything else like that. So he's like, let's make the most boring fucking diet imaginable of rolled oats and like cornmeal cereal and everything else like that. So it's just like, people just forget that like that was the reason why he wanted everyone on this diet. And it's just like, literally, yes, it makes you a beta male. Soy boys have lower testosterone. Crazy.
Yeah.
But they are heavily involved in like basically every single dietary standard, the Seventh-day Adventists. There are a great many I don't necessarily know if it's universities, but there's a great many diet related like societies which lobby the government for certain like standards and guidelines and everything else like that. I think they were involved with the formation of the food pyramid. But like some of these places, it's just like, oh, you want to become like a dietitian at this place? You need a recommendation from your Seventh-day Adventist deacon to join. And it's just like, okay, so why are we taking this place seriously necessarily? Would they have just like a complete bias in this regard, where it's just like, it's crazy because it's very, I wouldn't necessarily say cult-like, but it's edging there.
Edging.
Yeah.
What about saturated fat? You know, I assume they've spoken out vehemently against it.
Yeah, saturated fat, it's just like I think lipid plaque hypothesis or something else like that. I could be getting that mixed up, or just total misnomer. But it's basically the idea of a plumber. The plumber cleans pipes. He realizes, hey, if you pour saturated fat down your pipe, it'll stick. And then and then a doctor looked at that and he said, oh my God, that's why we have heart disease, where it's just like, no. First of all, it's specifically oxidized LDL saturated fat are the types that then stick to the wall of the artery. And the only way that you can have oxidized LDL fat is if you have oxidation agents in your body. And you only have that and those are all like environmental. So the oxalates in your spinach aren't too good for you. They're kind of oxidative. There's the idea of oxidative stress, where just things from your environment can cause issues. And the products that seed oils put off when exposed to heat and light, including within your body, are fucking terrible. They oxidize you terribly. And polyunsaturated fats are necessarily unstable to where they will oxidize, and then they put off oxidation products and everything else like that within your body, which is terrible for you. And then I think too, the blood cholesterol doesn't correlate with dietary cholesterol, to where your body needs cholesterol. It is a building block of testosterone and other hormones within your body, so your body's just going to produce it as it goes. So you run into so many issues when you try to cut that out. You're going to have terrible hormones and everything else like that. You're going to have to like take a statin, and then your dick stops working because your statin makes your dick stop work, sorry to say. And then you're going to take Viagra. Well, who's the company that's giving me Viagra? Oh, the same one that's the largest producer of statins in the United States too, where it's just like they're making you sick, then selling you the cure, and then selling you the cure to the side effects of their cure, and so on and so forth. And it's going to continue on until you break out of it and start eating the red meat.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Okay, so let's see. So we got Patrick again saying, agreed that the way to libertarianism isn't through politics. It would be foolish to ignore the fact that until a substantial area of land is vacated by a state, we can never get to libertarianism.
Actually, that's already the status quo. I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, you see the amount of land that the state and state agents exercise actual direct control over. It's really, really, really tiny. And that's not even talking about like areas out in the sticks. Like, there are just lots and lots of places, even in urban areas, that police officers just straight up don't go there. And in many places, like there are, like I think in New York City, like the NYPD is so hilariously understaffed that they don't even like issue tickets or arrest people if the crime that they committed is going to result in a fine under $950. That my information may be out of date, so someone will probably correct me on that. But I do know that like similar situations have popped up in cities all over the United States, and certainly they try to justify it on the basis of Black Lives, of them trying to be receptive to the demands of Black Lives Matter and hashtag defund the police. But it seems more likely to me that the reason for the closure and the mitigation of a lot of police departments around the country, not just in cities, but around the country, is just simply because local municipalities and cities just can't fund them.
I would disagree for the reason why I think these Soros-backed DAs are specifically light on crime, specifically to violate property rights by proxy. I think they are trying to, and this is to get a bit further back and get a James Lindsay, they're trying to initiate a Hegelian dialectic or dialectical synthesis to try to have this problem of crime in the city, the state backing off just to justify further state intervention and further state involvement into the lives, where it's just like, okay, well, you see, we're having all this crime problem, and it's totally not because we're not enforcing it or anything. I mean, it is, and everything else like that, but we have a solution. And the solution to this crime problem is that we're going to install smart sensors in the grocery stores, and they'll scan your face, and then if you're a criminal, it'll just not let you in, and it'll know exactly what you took. So if you shoplifted and now you're in a 15-minute city, and now they can track you everywhere you go. So I think it's just a way to bring about this fucking dystopian new world order. But oh no, you're a conspiracy theorist if you look 3 steps ahead of where we are currently.
I disagree with that, but I understand where you're coming from. So I'm going to go off of that basis. There is a very strong case to be made, and I think you did say it very well, that this could easily just be they could easily just be setting up a synthesis while we have the antithesis being set up. It's like, oh no, crime is happening, and then they come in with their prearranged solution. That does make sense. That said, I still see that in instances where people do try to defend themselves against criminals doing criminal stuff, like, I don't know, some tweaker out in Kentucky, in Louisville, goes up to someone with a knife, guy flashes a gun, the tweaker has enough sense to realize, like, oh crap, I'm in danger, I better get the heck out of there. The cop coming around, you're not going to give a crap about the tweaker trying to mug someone, but he sees that guy flashing a gun, so it's like, oh man, your ass is grass, boy. Stuff like that. Like, I remember a couple years ago, back when like the BLM riots were in full swing, this one St. Louis couple who had a pretty large house defended their property with a handgun and an AR-15. The rioters trying to break in and actively committing vandalism, completely untouched, but the prosecutors were very eager to throw the book at them. So clearly, like, crime is still being enforced. But it occurs to me that another possible explanation is that the people that they're going after are the ones that are, for want of a better term, easy pickings, the ones that aren't going to resist, that aren't going to fight back, that still operate under the belief generally that the state can work in their interests. Whereas you go to people who are ordinarily going to be with the BLM crowd, people who live in inner cities, in the ghettos, they have a pretty clear understanding of what the relationship with the state is like and are actively going to be antagonistic. And when the cop escalates force, as they inevitably would, they run a great risk of being assaulted or even killed, or possibly even worse, being Derek Chauvined, in the sense of like their name and reputation just becomes absolutely destroyed. Not to say that he didn't deserve it, of course, he absolutely did, but you can imagine that that factors into a lot of the what's the term here, incentives of how individual cops act and operate, and how police precincts are going to allocate their resources. You see, the rich people, the white collar people, they don't really have money to be able to pay the fines, but they're not going to resist arrest. they're going to resist arrest, which puts our people in danger, and we can't have that. So that's, I think, that's how, at least I think, how it goes. It's entirely possible that both of our ideas can be true simultaneously. They're by no means mutually exclusive, but that's just the way I see that things are going the way they are.
Okay, let's get some chats in. We got Grambo saying, thoughts on Henry Kissinger finally dead? In my opinion, too little, too late.
Rest in piss, you won't be missed.
Yeah, Patrick said piss Assinger. Yeah. All right, we got Humvee back saying, I'd edge to a crunch wrap. I have to prepare for Destroy Dick December. Yeah, well, let's...
Wait a minute, yeah. What the heck were you doing?
Yo, it's already tomorrow? All right, let's see. JC Armitage saying, the food pyramid still can't convince me that the bottom part of that thing says to have 7-Eleven of some units of grains a day wasn't just a way for their corpo comrades to sell us more product.
No, it literally was, because the scientists who were already like not too on board with it were like, okay, so more fruits, more vegetables, less grains, and then the government's just like, I think we'll up the grains from, it was something like 3 to 4 servings, which is still pretty high, to, yeah, let's up it to like 7 or more. Let's up it to 7 or more. And it's totally not because, one, their food programs want to rely on cheap food, which grains are, and then the people who benefit from using the government food programs are the grain lobby and everything else like that, because Jesus Christ, the United States have so many grain subsidies and everything else like that. And then, as a side point, people like to point to, oh, the meat industry is being subsidized because of how much like grain feed is being subsidized. One, grain feed is terrible for cows. It converts omega-3 fatty acids into omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-6 fatty acids are terrible for you. Omega-3 fatty acids are good for you. Think about like cod. I think cod liver oil is an omega-3. Omega-3 is in like salmon and everything else like that. Omega-6 fatty acids are found in like virtually every seed oil, including olive oil, but less so. But when a cow or a pig or a chicken is like on a feedlot eating grain feed, all of their omega-3s are converted to omega-6s. It's not good for you. But you have all of these moneyed interests involved in this. But people like to say, oh, if beef wasn't subsidized by the government, it would go up to like $20 per pound and everything like that, even for the cheap cuts. And it's just like, no, the economic model for which it's organized would change to where you would have more free range cattle farming and more grazing and everything else like that, and less feedlots, because then it would be cheaper to cattle farm than it would be to use feedlots. And people probably in rural areas who have a patch of land would be economically incentivized to free range, to ranch, everything else like that. So you'd see a lot smaller producers, though this problem is also caused in major part by regulations forcing individuals with cows to only slaughter them at government-approved slaughterhouses, and there's only like a few in the United States.
I'd need to see the information on, cows that are fed grains having a higher content of linoleic acid, because what I've heard is that ruminant animals don't actually have the same problem as ones that aren't. Like pigs and chickens would basically have this problem a lot more than cows would.
I don't have it with me right now, but I can try to find it later for you.
Okay. Because what I've heard is that like the safer bet is just going to be beef if you had to deal with like an animal that's grain fed. So I would say either it's not a problem or there's levels of severity.
Yeah, beef would get you beef would get you a like B- if it was like grain fed beef, or if it was like grain finished beef, it would like B-. If it was like grain fed its entire life, it's like C+. But then you have fucking like soy slop, and then that's just like an F-.
Well, what would you rate? What would you rate like chicken and pork that are fed corn and soy?
Chicken, pork fed corn and soy, probably like I don't know necessarily where like pork matches with chicken. I'd put pork more so at like C, and then chicken at like C-.
Okay.
But probably around the C area. Let's
see. Mr. Merchant says, what joke? What is a fat comedian's least favorite form of fat? Answer, saturated fat.
You have a soundboard? Is this the first time you used it?
I'm sorry. I don't get it.
I didn't get it, but I gave him that rim shot there. Let's see. So JC Armitage says the LAPD won't go after anyone who steals stuff under a certain banknote value, I believe, but will happily go after those who defend themselves from said thieves. But cops are totes defunded, y'all.
And I wanted to get to that after we had chats, but now's a good opportunity. But I think the prosecution of self-defense is definitely part of the dialectic. And what I would like to say is beware of the right arm of the left. Again, got that from James Lindsay. But you take a look at San Francisco, you take a look at Portland, and you see they decriminalize drugs, abridge property rights more than the norm, because of course the state does in a totalizing sense. They put in roadblocks for self-defense where you can't get a gun unless you fill out X, Y, or Z permit process and everything like that. They're being a little bit, they're being challenged by the Supreme Court and everything else like that, but that takes time. And they absolutely prosecute it when it does happen. Oh, a dude was like holding a knife to you and like trying to rob you and mug you, and then you fought back. Okay, well, I guess you're going to have to go through this court process and probably end up in jail for at least a few years. So go fuck yourself. And then you have conservatives calling for law and order in this case, which I want to say, just like the two aren't connected with each other. The only thing that brings about order is justice, and that would be natural law in terms of the non-aggression principle. And when you have statist law, legal positivism, law created by democracy, by the state, by just people thinking it up, even by monarchs and oligarchs and whatnot, you're going to have disorder. We have disorder because of the very state above us who is imposing law. But these conservatives are all the more happy to give more power to these local politicians who they hate in every other circumstance and who are just going to abuse it the same way that they normally do because that's part of the system.
All right. So we got Patrick saying libertarianism is the political answer to the ethical problem of the existence of the state. Simply because the state doesn't enforce every inch of the country doesn't mean the problem of the state enforcement isn't there. Yeah.
Like if you were out in the boondocks and tried to form like a stateless society and being like, we are our own territory and we're not paying the taxes of the federal government, the feds would soon be a knocking like they did with Waco or Ruby Ridge or anything else like that.
Yeah, pretty much. All I was saying when I was commenting that the state doesn't have complete dominion is just the demonstration of the fact that they simply do not have the ability to watch everybody doing everything at all times. They can't even do a teeny bit. That said, they're still going to be doing stuff, and as their organizational model collapses in real time all around them, I fully expect them to become ever more aggressive. Of course, they'll continue to try to propagandize as, oh, we're strong, we're mighty, America's strong, we're back, we're going to kick everything's ass. But of course, it's like what Sun Tzu said, look strong when you are weak.
Yeah, I mean, that last part about the state aggressing more as it is breaking down, that is something that Ancat, I know he sent like the Konkin clip where Konkin's mentioning, and this is actually relevant to the idea of libertarian politicians. Basically, the state has many excuses for why it should exist. And closer to the end of the state actually being a thing, it starts to say, okay, well, now the excuse for the state needing to be a thing is that the state needs to protect you from the state. And there being like a libertarian will like, quote unquote libertarian will be the person to help do that. Basically the state needs to enforce, things against itself for you. And then it needs to break itself down for you, because even if the state isn't necessary anymore, well, we still need somebody to, facilitate that process. And it shouldn't be you, it should be the state, of course, because that's what the state does. Right. But it gets to the point where, the state will say, okay, well, there's going to be a transition process in between this and a stateless society. And anybody that acts out will essentially have to be taken in just for the sake of order, by our freedom fighters, of course. And so basically it just gets to the point where the state in trying to grapple with the fact that it can no longer uphold itself will just continue to apply pressure on the people around it that it has tried to control for all this time in order to, in a last ditch effort, essentially see what it can do.
And the solution that I would have to that is divide the state such that it is small enough to drown it in a bathtub and then do so.
Pause. Are you talking about going back in time and killing Hitler as a baby kind of thing? You said drowning in a bathtub. It's got to be pretty small for that.
How's that related to Hitler?
The state can't be quantified in terms of a size. Honestly, I have to push back against the idea of.
I mean, there's territory where it controls. Sorry, are you gonna finish? There's territory which. Oh, sorry. I'll let you.
It's the delay. I know it's not. I know it's not you. It's the delay.
If he does it again, say the N-word.
Okay.
It's I would say like there's the territory it controls, and then the people within the organizational structure and whatnot. The either way you do it, either way you split it up, it's not like the same amount of. I think it's multi-millions of people in the federal government. They wouldn't be looking after the same patch of land as, say, like Hawaii. You wouldn't have millions of people in the state over Hawaii because there just simply aren't that many people, and it would be too parasitic of a structure to where it would completely break down. And the same would be true for like smaller dominions of the state, which is why I'm for pan-secessionism.
So when you're saying smaller state, you're referring to just quantity of land that it exercises dominion over.
Either that, and then also decreasing of state actors or agents of the state.
Ignis, okay. I didn't know you were pan.
I love my pans. I love my like good cast iron. I love my good carbon steel, stainless steel. Damn, boy.
All right. So everybody listen closely. If you want to screw with Ignis, just make sure you put his frying pans through the wash cycle to get rid of his spices.
You just reminded me of the washing chicken meme, and I hate it so much.
It's not relevant to the topic, but I think at some point we're going to want to have to talk about secessionism.
Okay, let's.
Should we like jump back to Milei like this episode?
I did bring him up here and there. We've brought him up like in the middle of the conversation. Yeah. I guess we'll get back to some of those other chats. They just had to do with the diet stuff. We'll see that after though. We could talk about secessionism, but also I did want to talk about some more stuff with Milei, like we were talking about with his policies before. I mean, I feel like I did kind of cover the dollarization stuff. Like with the thing where he was saying he wants to do that. I was gonna say like, are these campaign promises or like are either known to him or not? Like, they were never gonna happen. I was going to mention that I don't really think like the state of Argentina necessarily sees something like that as a threat, just because like the state of Ecuador did it in 2000. I looked it up to keep itself stable. So, I mean, like maybe it might get rid of the central bank for that time if it needs to hook onto the dollar. I mean, I don't really think that's something that necessarily like interferes with the state's ability to tax, because it's still this currency that's like, it's trackable.
Yeah. When it comes to dollarization, I think there is a good reason to not piss off every like central banking at large, because hey, they kind of have a lot of money and have a lot of sway in the world. So to buddy up with America and be kind of like pro-America kind of puts you in a spot where you're less likely to be assassinated, because I wonder who does all the assassinating in the world, or most of it, or like does all the regime change. But I think his plan is to legalize the dollar as a legal tender, probably inject money. I've heard some theories about how he can do it and how he can con the politicians in other countries or Wall Street or something like that, but I'm not bought into that. But then I think his plan is to allow all forms of currency as legal tender. And I think that might make it hard to tax. I don't necessarily know about that, but I think specifically getting people on hard money, on precious metals and whatnot would be good. Cryptocurrencies definitely have utility, and I think that's where their value is, not necessarily in anything inherent to them. But in terms of dollarization, I think the people of Argentina would prefer our inflation rate of, say, like, I think the real inflation rate was like 22% if you actually include everything over a year, which, like, holy shit. But the supposed inflation rate of what, like 7 to 10%. And then they would prefer that to the 100, 200% inflation that they have. And I think that's fine for them. I think that puts them in a more preferable state smallness.
Just on your point of like him, like, you know, being friendly to America and all that, I saw this like thing from Jeremy Kauffman where he's saying it's smart for Milei to signal to the international power structure that he's not a threat. The guy is having to have the space to reform his country, not start an international libertarian revolution. And basically this is like an article where it talks about Milei meeting with a Biden aide after lunch with Bill Clinton. And so it's like, oh yeah, you know, he's meeting up with the Democrats. Like he's, you know, he's meeting up with American politicians. Like he's trying to make sure that they know that he's not trying to create any sort of serious revolution or anything. It's just that he's trying to, you know, liberalize, you know, the policies in Argentina. And that's kind of like the angle Jeremy Kauffman's going from it at. I mean, like, I don't know, like to me, that just seems more like, it's like, okay, well, here's our justification for why he wouldn't actually do something like that, rather than it being, well, he necessarily cannot do something like that.
I don't necessarily get. Could you explain what you mean a bit more?
So like, what I'm saying is basically it almost seems a little bit like Cope to me, that like, you know, and that's, I guess the simplest way to put it is that, okay, well, Milei is meeting with like Democrats and all that, and meeting with other politicians from the United States, and like, you know, talking to all these people because he's really just trying to show them that he's not any sort of, you know, revolutionary that's going to bring in any sort of libertarian change, because he needs to just liberalize the policies of Argentina. And that's what he's really there for. He's just really there to like, you know, do that. But what it seems to me like more so is like that almost is just an excuse for him, whereas like not even just an excuse for him, I would say just an excuse for like what a libertarian could do in office, rather than like them acknowledging that, well, I mean, if he's in office, he actually doesn't really have much control over what the policies actually are. He's just the guy talking about what his proposals are, and basically seeing, you know, like the state is seeing how popular those things are, or putting like an ideological figurehead there for the justification of their policies.
I would have a slight disagreement. I think the Biden aid was kind of just to be expected. Like, he's a world leader, so he's going to have talks with the president of the United States, because that's just what happens. But obviously, the president of the United States is not necessarily always in the condition to be talking with people. So talks to an aide, and also minor country Argentina versus major country such as XYZ European nation or China. So he wouldn't necessarily have the talk with Biden himself.
I think the point was also that he like met up with Bill Clinton.
Yeah,
I think that's why it was being pointed to.
I think the Bill Clinton lunch meeting is more implicative of that possibility than the Biden aid meeting. Would love to hear what happened at that, or anything else like that, or if it was just like a big banquet hall or something. He was just like there, or had lunch with him. Bill Clinton, I imagine he's fucking senile. Maybe not as much as Biden, and he should be. I think he's older, but it's just like,
isn't Carter still alive?
Yeah, he was
Biden
alive.
Met up with Carter and his wife, and they were like shriveled.
Actually, I think Biden's older. I only know this because I actually don't know Bill Clinton's age. I just know that Bill Clinton's a boomer, but Biden is silent generation. He's actually the first silent generation president in American history, if you can believe it.
Whack. Let's see.
Yeah, so I was also going to just talk about, let's see. So we talked about dollarization. No, that's what we just talked about. I was going to say, him saying that he wants to abolish like ministries of the government. And basically, if you've seen, he had that like viral video. I mean, suppose like, I would say that like within the libertarian space, it was viral. Okay. But yeah, where he's like saying like, you know, ministry of like females and whatever, like afuera, you know, and like, have you seen that one? Have you seen this video? Yeah. Okay. He's like ministry of tourism and sports, afuera. And he's like saying like this, that, and the other. He's like, get out of here. Like, and then he's like, what you're left with is the government. Like, you know, it's these agencies that make up the state. Like, you know, finally you're getting rid of all the excess, is essentially what he's implying with that at the, I mean, he did say what you're left with is the government, like, you know, in Spanish though. But the point with that being like, it just seems more like he's talking to the more liberal people that are like, oh yeah, well, you know, the problem with government is actually that it's bloated and like it needs to be cut a little bit, and we actually need to get to the essential functions of the state, you know, like actually running a country and actually running a society, and it just seems more to me like that. And obviously, like he would do that as sort of a politician, because I mean, you know, obviously, like what politician is right now popular that's saying like, oh yeah, let's get rid of everything, but you know, yeah, I mean, like it really just speaks to like where he's at as a candidate, I suppose I would say, and also just like, you know, what essentially his purpose there is. Like, he's not really, I guess, just as like the figurehead that he is, like he's being propped up as somebody that's there to get rid of government excess rather than get rid of government. And at the same time, like, it makes sense that Argentina would want to be doing this right now and not necessarily saying this is our justification for why the state needs to end.
Well, it would also.
Sorry, you go.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so politicians saying one thing to one group of people and then saying something different to a different group of people. Where have I heard that before?
Everywhere.
I all I know is that, like, back in the day when I used to be a Burkean conservative, as in like basically Republican, that was something I noticed even back then.
Mhm.
And I can't say I'm surprised to see it now. You know, people who say one thing and do another. Basically, like, I didn't even know about this before, but I can't say I'm terribly surprised about it either. It's kind of just confirming what I suspected from the very beginning about this guy, where he is just going to do what is necessary for someone who is in that position, and what literally anyone in that position would actually do. Now, is he a good guy, an evil guy? I don't know. I don't know his heart. I'm not going to pretend to, I'm not going to judge, because honestly, I've never met the guy. I'm sure he's a horrible, horrible person, but
He seems like an RA guy, you know, as a
pretty
person.
He's General
pretty sure he's-
ANCAP. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Are you going to diss General ANCAP?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm only guessing this on the basis that he is a head of state, and you have to have a certain level of sociopathy to even be allowed to run for that level of position. So it kind of makes me wonder what kind of Epstein-esque nonsense and blackmail they have on him. Again, I don't know anything. I'm just speculating here, but I do think that he is going to end up being another politician.
Why would you diss this guy?
Because he's a head of state.
Hold on. Can I get this bigger for you? That's what she said.
Yeah. Also, I'm pretty sure he's cosplaying as the main character in Eric July's comic book.
Into the Agora says he seems very
It might have been
autistic.
older than that.
Very possible that he is.
It's very
And
possible,
I think it is older than that.
Also, I'm pretty sure that's not what the main character in Eric July's comic actually looks like.
He's black.
I just did that because I think it's funny.
But what I would say is Javier Milei started the polls at like 7%. So I don't necessarily think like the state was just like, yes, we need, or like the ruling class was just like, yes, we need to make sure that every third party candidate that we have is a sociopath and we have blackmail on them. I'm sure they're trying to gather as much as they can through, or they gathered as much as they can through political opposition research into his life, and then that they would release publicly, and then the stuff that they would have to threaten him with if he were to maintain office. But I don't necessarily think that's something that they do like ahead of time. I think that's something that they do in the lead up to actual change, which I don't think that takes too much time to do that sort of research, especially if you have access to the internet and all of his accounts and have all the Mossad hacking tools and everything else like that.
Don't say it. Don't say it. I'm not going to say
talk
it.
about those.
I'm not going to say it.
They totally did lose track of them.
I'm not going to say what race the doctor was.
Say it.
It was a Jewish doctor.
Yes. Yeah, that all checks.
But I would say that the government is worse when it's bloated. It's worse for people when it's bloated. And there was one other thing that you talked about, like anyone in the, something along the lines of anyone in his position would do that as like an agent of the state in this regard. I don't think the person he was opposing, I forget the other dude names, but I don't think the socialist or ardent socialist that he was opposing was going to enact the same policies in the same way. I think you would have seen a closer track to what Argentina was currently on. And it was through the voices of the people that he came into office, and everything else like that. Like, he won the election. That was a political upset that they were that many moneyed interests were probably trying to advocate against, and now they're going to reassess their possibilities in preventing him from enacting what they would dislike currently.
So another policy I'd like to talk about is that he basically there was an article going around that oh, well, he's going to turn over the national airline to the employees. But what I said when I first saw it, and I actually posted about this in my server and talked about it, was that Argentina's national airline may very well be privatized because, I see the incentive there. It's seemingly because it has turned zero profit since it was nationalized. That's actually shocker, right? But, that's probably why the state has the incentive to do that, so that it isn't just hemorrhaging money. And so what I'm seeing overall is a pattern of inefficiencies, with what Milei's calling out. Obviously, that's part of why people seem inspired by him, but at the same time, it's part of why it would make sense that some of these policies actually would go into effect, just because, as I've been saying, this is sort of a guy who would present that sort of ideological cover for these cutbacks being made. And so, additionally, I was just going to add on to this, giving the company to the employees. It just seems more like it would be giving it over to, more so the management. It's essentially just being kind of run the same, just without the state actually funding it indefinitely, and instead actually trying to turn a profit. So, that's really the only difference I see with it. It's still a white market firm.
But to that, I'd say at the same time, the state still can continue to eat the inefficiency by continuing with their hyperinflationary monetary policy, which it is very likely that the socialist would have continued to do should he have won. And so, of course, you're going to see a person who runs on cutbacks to government spending as to not hyperinflate the currency. And if he's able to explain the point well enough, get the average person to be like, okay, maybe I'll give it a shot, or something else like that, of the sort where it's if you run on this policy of not going to hyperinflate the currency anymore, and that requires spending cutbacks and everything else like that, then people are going to look at it and say, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And also, if he's going to dollarize, and if he's going to get the government of Argentina onto the dollar itself, then they aren't going to be able to have this hyperinflationary monetary policy and just pay for everything by printing more money.
All right. So you have anything to add, Filthy?
Yeah. The dollarization thing seems to only be happening because the Argentinian peso is, it's fundamentally worthless. Yeah. And because, it's not only not able to be traded as effectively as the dollar, because let's be honest, the dollar in international trade is probably one of the most valuable commodities one could possibly have, at least for the time being. It really makes sense that if the Argentinian regime wants to maintain its organizational model, they have to entangle themselves with arguably one of the most successful regimes that currently exists in terms of monetizing itself to maintain its fundamentally unsustainable organizational model. I'm saying organizational model a lot, but I think it's actually pretty important here to emphasize that, hey, they're not doing this just because the people are already trading it. Although one could very easily make the case that they're just trying to make a form of white market transaction, or a form of gray market transacting now part of the white market, so it can be taxed and regulated. Has anyone even talked about how much in taxation people were probably avoiding just by trading in United States dollars rather than Argentine pesos, which now are going to be able to be taxed? I think that's a fairly important point. And I granted, I don't know the extent of this, but I think it's something that's at least worth looking at. That said, though, this does come off to me as something that's done because they need to, as an organizational model. I don't know if it's they've made some really sweetheart deal with the United States Federal Reserve or some other central bank, or even just the World Bank. I don't know, but I genuinely can't believe what they're doing as anything just as hey, 150% inflation sucks. Let's not have that, because it's a political class. They don't care. Fact of the matter is, it's very often, you're familiar with Keynesian economics. it's a terrible economic model, but in terms of describing how it is that the political class understands, not really understands, but how it operates in an economic environment in terms of what's useful for the political class, it is actually a very useful tool for understanding. And it's very useful in that it actively describes how inflation is useful for them specifically. So in that sense, it's actually very good. To say nothing of the fact that inflation, while it is detrimental to savers for income earners, for debtors, which is going to consist largely of banksters, it's inflation is really, really good. It allows them to be able to leverage that to, gain more control over assets, over people, and their future earnings and well-being.
You could almost say they have an inflation fetish. Okay, so
I hate you.
We're going to get to chats again. Remember to like the show, guys, because I am reading your chats for free right now, okay? And you're leaving a lot of chats to read. Let's see. So we got Grambo saying, wasn't the grain response to prevent starvation during the Great Depression?
The history of civilization has kind of been a history of like dependence on grain, where it's like grain is like the most stable, or like carbs in general are the most stable form of macronutrient with which you can grow a society, from bread to anywhere, from bread to potatoes, everything else like that. You can actually grow a society off of that rather than meat, which takes more resources to take care of, maintain. Everything else like that takes a more supplementary role. So in the Great Depression, yes, definitely. In the Green Revolution, you had, I think, Norman Borlaug. He genetically modified wheat so that it was dwarf size, so that it didn't blow around in the wind and get collapsed and everything like that, so that you can get greater harvests out of it. And then you saw like the genetic modification so that it can be resistant to Roundup Ready, which is glyphosate. And I forget the specific issues with glyphosate, but there are many that you could likely point to. And it's in your blood, it's in your bones, it's in your eyes, it's in your the placentas of pregnant women, it's in fetuses and everything else like that. So that's not good. Similar to plastics. But yeah, grain's very important during basically every disaster, every economic downturn, and general civilization.
We got
Correct.
JC saying, don't forget high fructose corn syrup. That shit's in practically every food in the U.S. I'm going blind here. Is also another one of those grain subsidies.
Not only is it a matter of grain subsidies for corn, which is also why you see like corn ethanol and gasoline and everything else like that, which has its own subsidy structure for it, and a major reason for the subsidies, which corn ethanol as a fucking additive to gas is fucking stupid, because using it as an additive to gas is carbon positive. Like, it's not carbon negative, it's not carbon neutral, it's carbon positive, because you take energy to transform the corn into ethanol, and also it takes energy to harvest that corn, and then that's more than the energy that you use from the ethanol itself. So it's just fucking stupid, but they did it because there were moneyed interests, of course, but also we have high fructose corn in everything because sugar is expensive, because there are, I think, sugar tariffs, and then there are also subsidies towards the sugar industry in the United States, which is mostly based out of Florida, I'm pretty sure, where sugar, it's just the price is artificially raised, basically, to give them a comparative advantage through the use of the state.
All right, we got Grambo saying, let's see, hold on. Why having autonomous territory like without the state? Thank you. Have an autonomous territory without the state, have a sense of validity, or let alone using it as blackmail to convince them that without their culture, social norms, etc., would be gone.
I'm not sure I followed that one.
Yeah. Well, it seems like he's saying get the territory without the state.
And prove that social norms wouldn't not exist.
I'm thinking that social norms would be, the state social norms would be gone. I don't know.
The state definitely does engineer. I think what he's trying to say is that if you have a territory in the absence of political rule, that the social norms that the state actively socially engineers would just not exist.
Right.
Which is, I think, valid. But granted, I am just trying to guess what he's trying to convey.
Let's see. Javier Milei is control op, also trying to make crypto into the white market won't work. I mean, yeah, that is true that crypto in the white market wouldn't work.
I mean, they've tried a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a very strong case to be made that if you look at Bitcoin specifically as an investment asset, there's a lot of very large firms that are like really trying to get into Bitcoin right now. So I can expect it to bump in the not too distant future. Free investment advice. That said, here's more free investment advice. Don't look to crypto as an investment asset, you idiot.
Yeah.
All right. We got JC saying they say that when Operation Javier Milei gets fully put into office, the roads will leave us and ascend to the heavens because apparently libertarians allegedly hate roads or some shit like that. Yeah. Well, that would be an ancap dream come true.
Yeah, fucking hate roads.
Here. I'm trying to. I was driving home to work, and it may just be because he hasn't been sworn into office yet, but the roads are still there. It also might just
live in Argentina.
I saw somebody posting some what was her name, like Liberty Anders, where she was posting about like in Argentina, like because she's from there. She was saying like, well, people don't even share the roads on in Argentina, like or I guess they don't share them correctly, is what she was saying. Like, look at them, they're in the same lane at the same time. Like, what are they doing? Like, traffic is crazy there. They don't know how to drive. And then I think like Zulu replied to it saying the libertarian revolution's beginning or something like that.
Still safer than Texas roads, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Let's see. We got Grambo saying, wasn't he one of the spokesperson to the WEF and Simps for Israel?
Simps for Israel.
I shouldn't have said that word.
What, Israel?
Israel.
He doesn't simp for Israel. He's just highly protective of the Israel's ability to defend itself by unaliving entire swaths of people.
I read, I don't know if it's real or not, but I read somebody was saying like he was something about like no, he expressed his deep respect and gratitude for the teachings of the Rebbe and the Jewish community. I don't know. I thought he was like not converting or, but I don't know, like trying to adopt some sort of principles of Judaism.
To my knowledge, he was a converted Jew. I could be mistaken about that, but he spoke at the World Economic Forum to advocate for free markets and against their interests, basically. Didn't come back. They put him on their website as like a young global leader, the same way they did to Vivek. Vivek Ramaswamy.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Show Bob's in the
but I know about the World Economic Forum connection. However, I haven't brought it up previously just because I'm going to be honest, I really don't think it's that important.
Yeah, I think
every time I see the WEF, it's like I think of just like, you know, it's like a cartoonish grand scheme of things that everybody's supposed to pay attention to. It's like, look at that, like it's like a UFO, like almost.
I mean, it's just like the WEF it's like you could say that, but it's also like they have the same plans basically as the United Nations at the same time. And you have some overlap in the people there, and they have young global leaders such as Trudeau, who was like a graduate of their program and everything like that. But I think similarly to Vivek Ramaswamy, he's trying to sue to get off their site because he doesn't associate with it, wasn't one of their young global leaders, didn't approve of that being there.
Okay. Let's see. So Ancat said there's no way he's not autistic. Also seems like a good guy personally. I even think a good degree of politicians have good intentions. What matters is their actions. True. Yeah. Let's see. JC says, I don't know what Milei was portraying specifically, but I don't think it's one of Eric July's characters. Yeah, they're black. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Let's
General Ancat.
Yeah.
Into the Agora.
I know that. It's just that I was trying to make a joke.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I think what's more likely the case is these kind of candidates are welcomed into the state whenever they need to trim the fat in order to make the state last longer. Yeah.
Well, let's see. It's kind of the same thing with Burkean conservatism. Speaking as a former Burkean conservative, you're basically just an efficiency expert for the state.
Mm-hmm. Okay. the grain standard for Mr. Merchant. Let's see. Grambo says, also to clarify, the state uses the masses' needs, wants, desires, etc. when it comes to cultures, traditions, ideas as how society and norms form, for which the state claims and uses it as blackmail. That without the state, their way of life is non-existent.
Huh?
Okay. So like basically what I'm getting from that, because he's saying like the cultures, traditions, like society basically is being used against you as a form of like the state is making you believe that society is necessarily attached to the state. So getting rid of the state would get rid of the society you've come to know.
Like
I
there's
think
no.
I think
like
I
your
understand
culture.
what he's trying to convey here, and to try to elaborate on it a bit further.
Well, what I'm getting again is like, you know,
social
norms, sorry.
Yeah, the social norms that societies stuck with political rule necessarily formulate around are, well, as I said, informed by the state and political rule. However, because this has been going on for literal generations, and that these social norms are the only point of reference people have for how societies do, act, think, and just behave, they genuinely can't conceive of the state and society as being separate concepts. Certainly, they're separate terms, but in their minds, the abolition of society is the abolition of the state, and vice versa. So you can often see this in the way that politicized people will reply to anarchists, trying to say like how they just want a Hobbesian state of nature where everybody is constantly at war with each other. Whether or not they're consciously aware of that is impossible to say, but that's genuinely how they interpret our position. And of course, that's not their actual understanding. That's just what they've been taught to believe. That's what we're trying to do. But you know,
I've got a buddy of mine, RTG, who he's a German. I think he moved down to either Argentina or one of the other places a while back to escape like some like welfare trap that he was in, basically. But he likes to point out the difference in etymology, where everybody thinks that anarchy and a word enemy are the same, and enemy is social instability caused by erosions of standards and values. And
did you say anime?
Anime, yeah, that is the same thing, social instability and everything else like that. But whenever you see like the chaos in the streets and fire and brimstone and dogs and cats loving each other, getting along, that's anime. And there has been a significant propaganda push by the state to generally make people believe that anarchy and anime are the same thing. And actually, anime isn't a term in and of itself, even though it's to my knowledge, a sociological term. But in the general consciousness that they are the same thing, and that anarchy brings about anime, which is false, believe it or not.
I've never heard that term before, by the way.
Yeah, it's the first time I heard the term too from him. Very good.
Okay, so we got Ancat saying, I believe Rothbard himself first called Milton Friedman an efficiency expert for the state, where he helped Reagan trim the bureaucracy to collect higher taxes.
Higher tax revenue.
Yeah, that's where the efficiency expert for the state thing that I used came from.
Okay.
I would still say it makes people's lives better.
I would. It's a kind of an interesting question that I was actually meaning to bring up before the debate started, but the opportunity never came. Better for who, though? And that begs the question, what counts as better? Because better would generally, I think we can all agree, would generally refer to people perceiving an improvement to their life, but it is just a matter of, as I said before, perception. And of course, value is entirely subjective. So for there can easily be a lot of situations where, even though not objectively, but you can make very strong cases that people's lives will be better, they may be worse in other ways. Maybe they're better or they're worse in ways that they actually care about. I mentioned before that the what are they called? The banksters, the really vile people, their lives are going to be worse off because of this. I'm sorry, the hucksters, the charlatans, the really horrible, evil, vile scumbags
the
whose
goofballs
interests I neither value nor care about.
But I would say better for the people of the United States because, and then better in terms of like preferable. So if you asked the individual people of the United States, would you prefer to have income tax of 100% or 80%? The vast majority, except for like the true socialists would say 80%. And if the true socialists knew that, hey, you're going to be the only one paying 100%, they'd be like, well, no, I want my shit. So virtually everyone would pick 80%. Okay, would you have 80% or 60%? Everyone picked 60%. Would you have 60% or 40%? Everyone picked 40%. Same thing down to 20%. And then I think 20% is like the supposed place where the Laffer curve is at its peak of like government tax revenue. But then if you ask people, would you rather have an income tax rate of 20% or 0%? The vast majority of people would selfishly pick 0%. And so that is the sense in which I mean better by preferable, where people would prefer it.
Well, again, it's a matter of preference, which is once again an appeal to a value judgment, which is not something that
which is subjective to the individual.
We can really give any kind of scientific description for. Certainly, you can point to people who are going to perceive a benefit for themselves, but it is just a matter of perception. It's a matter of value judgment, and really nothing more.
I would say the everything is within that. Having it be more preferable for those people is valuable because it's valuable to them.
Well, no, it's valuable to you. It's
no.
That doesn't necessarily entail some kind of intrinsic value attached to it.
No, like I'm saying, like the value in it is of those individuals towards that preferable state. Mm-hmm. Small s.
But what makes their perception of value any more or less valid than the people's perception of value who perceive it being an active detriment to their interests and well-being?
Because it's the property of those individuals.
According to who?
According to one, non-aggression. Like it is their income that is being stolen through via taxation for whatever social benefits programs.
Mm-hmm. But the property titles enforced by the state necessarily entails them to a certain portion of that income as unilaterally defined by them. And you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of people who are not going to perceive a benefit from this whatsoever. Most of those people are going to be part of the political class. Not exclusively, of course, but for the purposes of this discussion, yeah. That said, sorry?
And the scenario in which I gave is, would you rather pay a tax rate of 20% or 0% or 40% or 20% or something like that? It's not a question of what do you want other people to pay, because doing so without their consent is aggression. So I disregard the political class being like, but I want them to spend all of their money or anything else like that.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm talking about is approaching this from the perspective of the social sciences, which in that if we're trying to make observations in science, we have to get away from value judgments.
The whole point is that it's preferable for these individuals, and for that reason, and it is their property. Being the central thesis is that it is aggression. One ought not aggress. One includes one is the like generalized sense of one of all. So all ought not aggress. That includes the state.
Well, I mean, that's kind of one of the big problems with the non-aggression principle, which runs afoul of Hume's guillotine. You can't get an ought from an is. Either you cannot.
To say that you ought to. Sorry.
Either one can't commit aggression, or one ought not to.
No, to say that one ought to follow non-aggression must be premised with things such as one values truth or one values non-contradictory property norms, because that is what I am appealing to in terms of why you ought not. And that is implicit within the idea of one ought not aggress and everything else like that. If that needs further explanation, I kind of gave it there, But any sort of like argument, you're talking about why you should do this thing and everything like that, where it's just like, if you believe that you ought to if you believe that you ought not argue, then you wouldn't be arguing or anything else like that. So like the idea central to all of this is a adherence to truth, rather than not, because then there would be no point in arguing or anything else like that if you would not agree what is true or not. Like if someone denies the laws of logic, sure, you can't convince them. Sure, they're left empty, voidless, without any ability to make any claims about reality or anything else of the sort. So it's just like, congratulations, you threw all of the bathwater away, disregarding whether there was a baby inside or not. Have fun.
But your only ability to defend or to appeal to the non-aggression principle is itself an appeal to a value judgment, which itself disqualifies it from scientific truth.
To truth?
I mean, whenever, just to
Like
clarify,
you
whenever
ought to
something
act in
is being
accordance with the
scientifically
truth.
true, I refer to it as something being true independent of sensory perception.
I mean,
for example, if I were to take a rock and drop it, it would fall to the ground because of gravity, and we could replicate this and demonstrate that this property would continue to be true irregardless of who is perceiving it.
Well, that would be dependent on the reality of the situation. Alternatively, you can have something that is true a priori, or something else like that, where it's like law of identity, a rock is a rock, something like that. So long as you're not equivocating terms between different concepts, then it is true.
But there's no basis on which it can be true other than just an appeal to a value judgment or running afoul of Munchausen's trilemma.
What do you mean appeal to a value judgment? Via the law of identity, A equals A.
Well, how do you know that it's true or not?
Via the law of identity. And
That's
the law of identity.
Logical.
Yeah, at a certain point, like the laws of logic can only be defended via negative demonstration rather than any proof, because to prove or disprove anything, you must assume the laws of logic. That is part of the negative demonstration.
That's entirely presuppositional, though. It disqualifies the entire basis of your reasoning from truth.
No, explain.
If you have no basis on which something can be demonstrated to be true, then how are you supposed to know whether or not it's true?
That requires that is the position of negating the laws of logic, not affirming them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't get to truth that way. You must assume the laws of logic in order to negate them. That's the whole idea.
I'm not trying that. What I'm trying to do is demonstrate that using a priori reasoning as a basis for truth is always going to run afoul of several metaphysical problems, namely that there is no basis on which truth can be established because one has to make presuppositions just in order to make any kind of claim.
And how would that negate it? I'm not conceding the presuppositional aspect, but how would that negate it?
Because at that point, like, there's no, what's the term here? There is no standard of demarcation, because one could, at that point, make any claim that appeals to anything ever, in which case, because of, what's it called? Because of...
Can you disprove...
Why am I blanking on terms here? I know these. Put simply, your position lacks a null hypothesis, and literally anything can be true at any point ever.
Can you disprove that it's not a necessary supposition? Because I think this is something that Jordan Peterson talks about, where there are, at the root of all epistemologies, in order for them to approach anything near objective reality or truth, you must make what are practically faith-based propositions, such as or things that you can't prove, similar to faith-based propositions, such as the laws of logic. Can you prove that it is not a necessary supposition to accept the laws of logic?
That demonstrates a flaw in that reasoning, however, because at that point, like, again, literally anything can be true just on the basis
Okay,
of
you have
making
the
it a
same flaw
faith
of reason.
claim.
To make any statement, you must have the same flaw in reasoning.
Yeah, so what makes any claim that I'm making any more or less valid than anything you make?
Because I am not including non-essential suppositions.
But you're actively demonstrating a presupposition right off the
Okay, and
bat. You're demonstrating an appeal to what you admit to be a faith-based argument, which is fundamentally just an appeal to dogma.
I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Where
that doesn't mean necessarily
there isn't a proof for the laws of logic. They can only be defended via negative demonstration. You accept them implicitly, so, and you're just gonna stand there and say, "Oh, but you're being dogmatic about it." Like there's any difference.
There is very much a difference, because I'm not attempting to claim that I have any particular truth. I'm just trying to demonstrate that a priori reasoning, if that's the appeal that you're going to be using for arriving at any of these claims that you're making, particularly the non-aggression principle, that you fundamentally don't really have a basis for it. The non-aggression principle is literally as valid as me claiming that the sky is made of cheese.
Is it true that you just said that statement?
Did you hear that statement?
Is it true that you said that statement? This one.
Did you hear? I mean, I'm just.
Is it true that you asked that question?
I'm assuming that. I mean, I heard it. I heard myself say it.
Is that true?
That the people in the audience heard it. Let me finish. Then there's a very strong case to be made that this will be replicated in the recording. So it's true that this statement is going to exist independently of our sensory perception of it. What meaning one derives from it is just simply going to exist within the minds of a preceptor.
Okay, to make any of those statements, you had to assume the laws of logic as a faith-based presumption.
How?
Just necessarily so. To make any statement, any rational statement, you must assume that A equals A doesn't equal not A, and A can either be true or false. You can either have A or not A. Yeah.
I can easily make a logical deduction.
Your no is a negation. Your no is a negation. It is the not A. So in order to have a no be true, then the opposite of it must be false. That, like, everything you're saying, every single like negation and everything like that is presumes the laws of logic. Saying like, non-contradiction is false. Okay, but if you're saying non-contradiction is false and that it is not true, you are using the law of non-contradiction. If you are referring to the law of non-contradiction, then it itself is itself, which is the law of identity. It's all there.
No.
Yes.
Why can't
it be no and yes? Why can't it be no and yes?
Because I'm not attempting to use those as the basis of my claims.
You're not attempting to, but you are.
I've heard you throughout this entire stream make appeals to the laws of non-contradiction, the law of identity, as the basis of your reasoning. However, there hasn't been a single case where I have done so. You have attempted to apply that reasoning to me, but
that's the basis of all reasoning.
I don't operate that way.
Okay, well, you do. Sorry to say it, but you're wrong. You could just throw your hands up and say that it's not true, but to say any statement, or like to say no, again, to say no, that is not true, is to negate that it can be true at the same time.
You don't have a basis for knowing that.
You don't have a basis for negating anything that I say.
Okay.
No, I do.
Hold on. I got one from Into the Agora. He has a couple good chats, but like this one is actually a really good one here that I'd like to put here. He says he's confused on how you even espouse praxeology if you deny a priori reasoning, unless we're defining a priori reason or a priori differently.
Prior to knowing anything about reality itself. basically.
Mm-hmm. So its praxeology is not prior to knowing. It's just simply an observation about psychology and the psychology of moral agents, at least as far as moral agents that are known to humans, that they're always going to be operating on the basis of the perception of their best interests.
I would disagree.
There's nothing prior to knowledge about it.
How do you defend the action axiom?
I'm sorry?
How do you defend the action axiom?
I don't.
You don't. Okay, so you reject all of praxeology?
No.
That is the premise of all of praxeology.
That's not the basis of praxeology.
It is.
No, it's not. The action axiom is an attempt to place an axiom onto what's fundamentally an observation.
How do you know the observation is true?
Because we can demonstrate it independent of perception.
But how do you know that observation of the demonstration is true?
Observation of the demonstration is true because I think I've already answered that one.
No, because it's an infinite regress.
We can demonstrate it independent of the sensory perception of those attempting to observe it. Even those with whose sensory perceptions are
same sensory perception as well.
Or disablement are able to experience this.
That requires the same sensory perception as well. It is a failure of empiricism, and just because you can observe something empirically doesn't mean that it can't be contradicted by future empirical observation. That is a failure of empiricism. You can't know anything truly for certain. So you can't know if there exists a man who acts purposefully, whose behavior implements means towards ends, because it can always be contradicted by future empirical observation in the epistemology that you espouse. Also, do you have a chirping going on in your background?
Yeah, I pointed that out before you got in here, and that's why you were confused when I was like, well, I didn't think you were black, like, because you were looking at me like, what did he say? Yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about.
I heard it earlier, but
I heard it throughout the stream.
Like, listen, we got a fire alarm here that whose wiring is connected directly to the house, and I can't turn it off.
Just replace the batteries.
There is no battery.
No. Well, I don't know what he's talking about, but I've had like this when I was in an apartment. I had this like panel in the wall that it would make like a sound every once in a while. I don't know if it was exactly like the smoke detector, but like for some reason, like it would like go off every few seconds or every like minute or so. And they had to have like the fire marshal or somebody come in to fix it, and then it broke again after the guy left, and he had to come back in to fix it. For ages, you would just hear this like every like minute, and it was terrible. I hated it.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, this thing is like, it's just as bad. And like, honestly, if there were a battery, I would have taken it out ages ago. I don't care about fire safety. This thing needs to go.
It's not take it out. It might be a watch battery, but it's like there's usually, if it's a normal smoke detector, or
it's not a normal
even
smoke
like
detector,
an
it's
abnormal
wired
smoke
to the
detector.
house.
There are smoke detectors that are wired to the house, and then they also have an internal battery in them. And then you can replace the internal battery, and that makes it stop beeping. But even if it's beeping, even if it's on low battery, it's still going to be connected to the house so that it doesn't not work.
Okay, so I'm going to start reading some chats because we do have some more to get to, I suppose. Let's see. So Ancat said, the state causes chaos, war, and plunder in the first place. Correct. Let's see. I wouldn't disagree that some people's lives may be improved in an economic sense, but if the state has more funds to fund its police system, it isn't worse off for drug offenders. He says better. He says better in correction. Yeah, that didn't make sense at first until I read the correction. It isn't.
I would say that a drug that certain people, particularly mafia, and I don't mean like mafia in the sense of backwards way of, or like trying to low key say the state. I mean like actual mobs actually do benefit from the state's presence.
Yeah. Let's see. So Into the Agora says that's what the state does at the end of the day. It privileges some people at the expense of others. It robs Peter to pay Paul. You were going to say something, Ignis?
Yeah, in terms of the drug offender, it could also be the case that it's better funded to get more gibs from the government and everything like that, so their life is better and everything. But they could have more resources at their disposal such that they can spend their money on more drugs if they like. Even if they get caught, they feel happier, or anything else like that, where you can leave it up to that individual to say, do I want to would I prefer having this much, or would I prefer having this much, and let them choose their situation. Like if you saw voluntary taxation, it would probably plummet to 0 or near 0. You would still have the status to believe it's my civic responsibility to pay my money to the government voluntarily, which would be utterly hilarious. But even then, that would probably collapse for the same reason that like a Tragedy of the Commons does, where it's just like you have a bunch of people who want to be takers, but no one wants to be a giver.
All right, let's see. So we got ancap. whoa, Ignis, whoa.
In reality, it's the other way around.
What just happened?
Well, I thought you weren't. I thought you were a munch. All right, let's see. So, okay, so that got me. Anyway, Angat said it's the same thing with the border issue. Opening the borders may be beneficial to the migrants, but definitely not to the people forced to integrate. All right, let's see. Grambo says, but why a state need oh my god but why is state a need, a requirement, let alone something that needs to be prescribed as a means to have their set interests met, plus F taxes in general?
I don't know.
You need to control your subscriber.
You want me to throw my hands up? You want me to throw my hands up and give up? Well, I mean, you can't see me because I have my camera turned off because I'm not insane, but my hands are up.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, Grambo. Let's see.
Know who you are.
Let's see. Ancat says this is one of my problems with Zulu's framing of argumentation ethics. He frames it in terms of normativity. For instance, you can argue that logically you shouldn't argue and still act against what you've argued.
I think Zulu's framing. Oh, sorry.
I have so many things to say about argumentation ethics. Holy crap.
I think Zulu's framing of AE is or just like the framing that I've heard, at least from him, or at least my interpretation of him, has been slightly off. Same with Hoppe. I think you can get to the non-aggression principle just via non-contradictory property norms being false and scarcity existing. I mentioned it earlier in the rough approximation that I have on my head is, first, let's define terms. As I mentioned earlier, conflict is the contradictory use of scarce resources as a means. Aggression is the initiation of conflict. Scarcity is the state in which conflict is possible. If scarcity exists, then there can exist conflict via the definition provided earlier. If conflict exists, then there can be contradictory use of scarce resources as a means, because that's just the definition of it. If you have two norms that leads to a conflict, you have two norms that are in contradiction with each other. Thus via the law of non-contradiction, the set of those two norms, or the set containing those two norms, is false. Thus there can exist norms that are false via self-contradiction in reality. And those norms that would initiate conflict would be aggressive norms. And thus aggressive norms would be false. And the set of norms that do not contain aggression would be the non-aggressive norms, which does not imply conflict, and thus non-aggressive norms are true, or are at least not false, not provably false via self-contradiction. And that would be a close approximation to what I'll probably refine later to be the proof. And probably.
But how is it possible to define true or false in any, not in a normative sense, but in the sense of true or false applied to norms directly? Since
statements about normative statements.
I'm sorry?
Statements about normative statements. So if a normative statement is in contradiction, if a set contains a normative statement in contradiction with another normative statement within the set, then the set is self-contradictory, and via the law of non-contradiction is thus false.
What?
I have the statement, say like this pencil is yellow and this pencil is not yellow. If this pencil refers to the same thing, can the group of statements be true can the group of statements be true? Can both statements be true at the same time?
Yes.
What?
A pencil in the same instance can be yellow and not yellow at the same time.
Correct.
How?
It's simple, really. I turn the lights off.
Bro.
Let's make it simple. Can assume a cube of iron. The cube is made of iron, and the cube is not made of iron. Can that be the true? Can that set of statements be true?
Yes.
How?
All right. So, Ludwig von
Not as simple
Wittgenstein-
this time.
No, it actually is. Ludwig von Wittgenstein actually talked about this exact problem, and that it's a problem intrinsic to information itself. I know you're sighing, and
Yeah, because you're sidestepping it.
I'm really not. I'm actually
Yeah,
trying to give an example
you
here.
just
I'm referring to the beetle in the box thought experiment that he proposed, that demonstrates that if you give a group of people a box with something in it, they're not allowed to show other people what's in the box, and there's a random item in the box, and their objective is to convince everyone else that what's inside of their box is a beetle. What's actually inside doesn't matter. You can give descriptions of what's in the box, but you can't show them it, and you're supposed to show them or you're supposed to convince them that what you have inside the box is a beetle. So you can have, for example, a cube of a ferrometallic substance that has all the properties of what is conventionally known as iron.
we assumed a cube of iron.
We assume that we
assumed
agree
a
is
cube
the
of iron.
That doesn't. All
No,
we know
that's
is
a different assumption. We assumed a cube of iron.
Can I finish?
Yes.
What you assume, there is nothing inherent to the properties of any given item, material, substance, or anything that implies context. The context exists entirely within the person's head, and you're assigning the term iron to a cube or the color yellow exists entirely within your own head.
This is what I love about the non-aggression principle, where you have to get people to engage in sidestepping and what I would consider to be, in a way, sophistry and the denial of the laws of logic in order to try to get out of it.
Well,
what the fuck did that have to do with the beetle?
You necessarily have to presuppose the context related. You have to presuppose that information has inherent context.
And
all you can really do is just do that John Leibowitz style of sighing and giggling.
Don't know who John Leibowitz is. I think it's just funny,
Jon
the
Stewart.
sidestepping that you have to do. Is that his name?
Yeah,
Is that
that's his actual name.
Okay.
His Jon Stewart's his stage name.
Gotcha.
Whoa.
Leibowitz.
Yes. I like to use that. I like to refer to him as that because it makes him sound dishonest, not because of the last name Leibowitz having any kind of ethnic or cultural context, but just because when people know that that's Jon Stewart, it makes him sound like a liar.
Jonah Hill Feldstein.
Is that his actual name?
Yes.
That checks. I mean, I know how stage names work. Don't get me wrong. It's just that I like to give the impression in people's minds.
Okay, so I
But
was just gonna
basically,
say,
through your through this situation that you described, is you are asserting a equivocation fallacy when none was committed. Basically,
Where?
The equivocation fallacy between like there's this concept and this concept, and thus that you are equivocating between these two statements when no evidence to that was given, and then thus these statements can both be true at the same time because two different people, and you are positing things not of the scenario in order to sidestep out of it.
I'm not sidestepping out of anything. We're having to assume context just for the scenario you presented to be valid.
So from Ancat, he says, Filthy, you're misunderstanding what the law of non-contradiction says. It has to be in the same sense.
I'm not sure I understand that. I would have to ask what he means by in the same sense.
Okay. Yeah, well, maybe he'll comment that by the time we're done here, but oh, hold on.
I think the same sense of like iron between statements.
I'll just ask a simple question. Describe red. That's not a big question, but describe red.
I could say red is red, and that's true.
That is a tautology. That doesn't really describe anything.
That is the law of identity.
That is a tautology, and I can't.
Statements expressing the law of identity are tautological.
I can't accept that as truth. There's nothing scientific about it.
What do you mean you can't accept? It is necessarily true because it is tautological. It doesn't gain you any information.
It doesn't describe anything.
But it's still true.
There's nothing useful about it.
But it's still true.
There's nothing.
Truth doesn't have to be useful.
There's nothing. You can't do anything with it, though.
No information is gained. Yeah.
There's nothing. Hold on a second. You were accusing me of sidestepping earlier, and now I asked you to describe red, and you just don't. You just use the term.
I mean, I'll describe it, but I wanted to make a secondary point about the law of identity and how it is true.
Describe red.
Red is a matter of my sensory experiences, and I could list the set of all things that I consider to be red. Such as red apples, the stockings behind me, or whatever the fuck. Yada, 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 yada.
I'm just going to tell you this on my screen. That's a really dark red.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say that. But that's
Ahmed's Santa cap. Yeah, I was about to look over.
But that's exactly what I was alluding to, describing, though. Your perception of red is going to be different than mine. I could be colorblind. I'm not, but I could be. And my perception of red would be what you perceive as yellow.
But is red not red?
When is red not red?
But is red not red?
Yes.
In the same sense, in the same, assuming consistency between red and red within those statements between each other, even if it's just between yourself in the simultaneous moment.
I gave you the perfect example already, actually, just a second ago.
No, you didn't, because that was between different actors.
If I had yellow-blue color blindness, my experience of an object that is red, not red, just an object that is red, and my perception of it would be probably equivalent to what you would perceive as yellow, and same as for myself, actually.
I think red's more darker, grayish.
And Kat says language is just a colloquial tool we use to describe concepts, though.
Yeah,
but
it's just getting into linguistics.
It is entirely possible for both of us to look upon the same object. Both of us agree this is red, but have a colorblind person look at it and just say, no, that's yellow. And
it's not between actors, though. I'm not saying between actors. I'm not assuming different actors. I'm not assuming two different senses.
But that's the nature of abstractions, though.
I'm referring to the concepts themselves.
Because actors need to be able to perceive them and then formulate a context by which they can understand what they are perceiving.
Mm-hmm.
The context exists entirely within your own head.
I think this is just linguistic sophistry.
All right. Yeah. Do we want to just...
I will say that it is sophistry, but only in the classical Greek sense, where I'm actually trying to teach you something.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
If you want to learn more about this, I would recommend you look up Philosophical Investigations by Ludwig von Wittgenstein. You can find his audiobook on YouTube if you want to be acting in a way that's obviously criminal. And so I do not recommend that you do look up the audiobook on YouTube, because that is definitely illegal and that would make you a very bad person.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see. Yeah, Ancat's confused. Filthy, I agree with you on a lot of shit, but I'm totally confused at this point.
You have a point to the subjectivity and the interpretation of language, but not on the abstractions themselves.
We'd have to have a ANCAP. We probably have to have a conversation at a later point about post-structuralist philosophy, because I think it's a pretty important thing that people are going to want to have to look into.
All right, so I think we'll just do the wrap up for the actual show here. We got way off topic on that, but it's fine. I was interested in the conversation. I hope anybody listening, right? Well, there are a few people in the stream still. I hope this was still interesting for you, even though you came for us. Pause. You came for us, and you stayed a little bit for Milei, and then you stayed at the end of it to figure out what red is. But yeah, I think since I let Ignis go first on at the beginning of the episode, let's see. I guess I will let Filthy go first, and then I'll let Ignis go after. Just general thoughts, or maybe if you just want to wrap up what you were talking about in the beginning with Milei, or even if you don't care about that anymore and just want to reiterate some point at the end that you just made, plus anything you want to shout out as well. I know, Filthy, you're from Backalley Philosophy. That channel has been shouted out before when Esso's been on, but feel free to talk about your newest video if you'd like as well after. You have the floor.
Yeah, so the latest video is just a helpful guide, I would say, for helping good patriotic Americans who don't want to do things like talk crap about central banksters and Rothschild shills like what's his name, Alexander Hamilton, and how to make sure that they don't dodge the draft when World War II comes around. I'm sorry, World War III comes around. Now, there is one thing I want to say before I jump off, which is, so what word begins with an N, ends with an R, and you never, ever want to call a black person?
What?
Neighbor.
Oh, wow. And it was still racist. All right. You managed to fit it in. All right, Ignis, go ahead.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. This has definitely been a long one. It's past midnight. Some places of the world, it's only getting there. Some others. But it's very nice to have a conversation with you, even though it has led to some Jon Stewart laughing areas. But it was nice talking with you. Nice.
John Leibowitz is my favorite minarchist.
Oh boy. But to everyone out there, I hope you try to bring about a non-aggressive society through your actions. I hope you try to act non-aggressively yourself. And yeah, just follow the show, like and subscribe. I know he likes that shit.
Yeah.
I'll probably have projects of my own coming out eventually, wrapping up some other things, but I'll get started eventually. That's all.
But for now, you can find Ignis on this channel exclusively. Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter if you'd like, or rest of social media at Civil Offense. My website again is ahmedmlih.com. That's AHMEDMLIH. Or you can add me on Discord. I think that would actually pretty much at this point be one of the best things you can do, because just the server is like the powerhouse of this channel as far as like community involvement and people talking, having these sorts of conversations and more. Just add me at anarcho-nitrain. That is NIGHTRAIN. And yeah, guys, remember that Civil Offense is the key to winning. Thank you.